The entire ballroom fell silent. Every eye turned toward the Duke and the woman no one had bothered to learn the name of. Adrian Blackthorne, the most powerful man in England, stood before Clara Whitmore. The family embarrassment, the spinster aunt, the woman they whispered about in corners, and spoke words that would shatter everything. "Miss Whitmore, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" But this isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of a woman who refused to disappear, a duke with secrets darker than his reputation, and the brutal war that erupted when an invisible woman dared to step into the light. If you're watching from London, New York, Paris, or anywhere in between, drop your city in the comments below. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Clara Whitmore had perfected the art of becoming furniture. Not literally, of course, though on evenings like this, pressed into the corner of the Ashford ballroom beneath a potted palm and a rather aggressive arrangement of hothouse lilies, she wondered if anyone would notice the difference. She had learned, over the course of nearly 40 years, exactly how to position herself in a room so that eyes would slide past her like water off marble, shoulders slightly rounded, gaze lowered but not subservient, just absent, present enough to fulfill obligation, invisible enough to avoid attention. It was a survival skill, and Clara Whitmore was, above all else, a survivor. "Good Lord, is Aunt Clara actually here?" The voice carried across the marble floor with the particular clarity of someone who didn't care or didn't realize they could be overheard. Clara didn't flinch. She'd had years of practice at that, too. Penelope Hartley, Clara's eldest niece, stood 20 feet away in a cluster of debutantes, their pastel gowns forming a bouquet of calculated innocence. At 19, Penelope had her mother's sharp features and her father's sharper tongue, combined with the particular cruelty that comes from never having been denied anything. Where else would she be? This from Marianne, the younger niece, whose sweetness was weaponized with precision. "Someone has to chaperone us, and since Mama refuses to sit through another season, she gets stuck with the spinster aunt." Penelope's laugh was like breaking glass. "I suppose we should be grateful. At least this way, we look better by comparison." The other girls giggled. Clara kept her expression perfectly neutral, her hands folded loosely in her lap, her breathing even and controlled. She had heard worse, much worse, and she had learned that reaction was what they wanted, the flinch, the blush, the stammered defense. Dignity, she had discovered, was the only armor that couldn't be stripped away. "I think she wore that dress last season," one of the other girls whispered, though not quietly enough. "Last season? Darling, she wore it 5 seasons ago. I remember because Mama said it was hopelessly outdated even then." Clara smoothed one hand over the dark blue silk of her gown. It was outdated, she knew that. The waistline was wrong for current fashion, the sleeves slightly too long, the neckline far too modest for the daring styles the young women favored now. But it was well made, carefully maintained, and it was hers. She'd bought it herself with money saved from the tiny allowance her brother-in-law provided. Because Clara Whitmore had no fortune of her own, no prospects, no independence beyond what crumbs were thrown her way. She was, in the eyes of society, a charity case, a warning, a cautionary tale whispered to young girls. This is what becomes of women who fail to secure a husband. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Around the ballroom, couples began to form, young women in their practiced grace, young men with their calculated charm, older couples moving with the comfortable rhythm of long partnership. Clara watched without envy. That world had never been hers, even in her youth. Her one season, undertaken at 18 with hope and terror in equal measure, had resulted in exactly 0 offers, 3 painful rejections, and a comprehensive understanding that some women were born to be ornamental and others were born to be practical. Clara had made her peace with being practical. "Miss Whitmore," the voice came from directly beside her, low, male, and entirely unexpected. Clara's head snapped up, her careful composure cracking for just an instant. The man standing before her was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, which was saying something considering she wasn't particularly short. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and aristocratic planes, with eyes the color of steel in winter. He wore black, almost aggressively simple in a room full of peacock finery, and yet he commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with decoration and everything to do with power. Clara recognized him instantly. Everyone in England would have. Adrian Blackthorne, the Duke of Ravencourt. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Clara wondered if this was some elaborate joke. If Penelope had put him up to this, some cruel game designed to humiliate the spinster aunt in front of the entire assembly. But the Duke's expression held no mockery. If anything, he looked bored, profoundly, aristocratically bored, in the way only the truly powerful could afford to be. "Your Grace," Clara said, her voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of her pulse. She didn't rise. To stand would be to acknowledge she should be honored by his attention, and Clara had learned long ago not to perform gratitude for scraps. Something flickered in those winter eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or interest. "You're sitting this one out?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward the dancing couples. "I sit them all out, Your Grace. It's rather the point of being a chaperone." "Is it?" He studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I was under the impression chaperones were meant to hover disapprovingly at the edges of the dance floor, ready to swoop in should any impropriety threaten. You're rather far from the action." "I find the palm provides excellent coverage," Clara said. "I can disapprove from a distance quite effectively." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. "Miss Whitmore," he said again. And this time there was something different in his tone, a decision being made, a path being chosen. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" The ballroom didn't fall silent. Life wasn't that dramatic. But Clara felt the shift nonetheless, the subtle turn of heads, the pause in nearby conversations, the weight of attention suddenly focused on the corner where the invisible woman sat. "I don't dance, Your Grace," Clara said quietly. "Can't or won't. The distinction hardly matters. It matters to me." Clara met his gaze directly. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't purely gray. There were flecks of darker color, like iron deposits in stone. And there was something else there, too, something that looked almost like recognition. As if he saw her not as the overlooked spinster, the family embarrassment, but as something else entirely. It was unsettling. "I appreciate the gesture," Clara said, choosing her words carefully. "But I assure you it's unnecessary. Whatever kindness motivated this offer." "Kindness?" The Duke's eyebrow arched. "Miss Whitmore, I am not known for my kindness. Ask anyone in this room." "Then why?" "Because I'm bored senseless, and you're the only person here who doesn't look at me like I'm either a prize to be won or a predator to be avoided. Because I've spent the last hour being hunted by every marriage-minded mother in London, and I find I prefer the company of someone who clearly has no interest in hunting me. And because..." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "Because I'm curious about a woman who sits in corners and watches the world with the eyes of someone who understands exactly how it works." Clara's breath caught. It was too honest, too direct. The aristocracy didn't speak like this, all cards on the table, no games, no layers of implication and suggestion. "One dance," the Duke said, extending his hand, "and then I'll leave you to your disapproving palm fronds." Clara looked at his hand, looked at the ballroom beyond, where she could already see the shock on Penelope's face, the calculation in Lady Ashford's eyes, the whispers beginning to spread like ripples in water. She should refuse, should protect herself from whatever this was, joke or whim or temporary insanity on the part of England's most powerful bachelor. But Clara Whitmore had spent 20 years being invisible, being practical, being the woman everyone overlooked, and she was so very tired of it. She placed her hand in his. The Duke's fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, real. He drew her to her feet with an ease that suggested he was well accustomed to leading, and Clara found herself being guided toward the dance floor with the kind of confidence that didn't allow for refusal. The couples already dancing parted like a wave. Clara was aware of every eye in the room tracking their movement, aware of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, aware that this moment, whatever it was, would be dissected and analyzed and weaponized by morning. "I wasn't lying," she said as the Duke positioned them for the waltz. "I really don't dance. I'll step on your feet." "I have other pairs of shoes," he said, and placed his hand at the small of her back. The orchestra swelled. The Duke moved, and Clara moved with him. Not gracefully, not perfectly, but adequately enough that she didn't immediately disgrace herself. He was a strong lead, the kind that made following almost effortless, and Clara found herself falling into the rhythm despite herself. "You're better than you claimed," the Duke observed. "I said I don't dance. I didn't say I never learned how." "There's a difference?" "There's always a difference between capability and practice, Your Grace." They turned, and Clara caught a glimpse of Penelope's face, shock giving way to something uglier. Resentment, perhaps, or fury that the spinster aunt was receiving attention that should have been directed toward the debutantes. "Your family doesn't appreciate you," the Duke said, and it wasn't a question. Clara's steps faltered slightly. "You presume to know my family?" "I presume to have eyes and ears. I heard what your niece said earlier." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. Not embarrassment, but anger. That he'd witnessed her humiliation. That he'd seen her sitting there, taking it like she always did. Like she had no choice but to endure. "Then you understand why this dance is a kindness I can't afford," Clara said, her voice tight. "Tomorrow, they'll say you pitied me. By next week, it will be a joke. The Duke danced with the spinster out of charity, or to win a wager, or because he was 3 glasses deep in champagne and not thinking clearly." "Let them say whatever they like," the Duke replied. "I stopped concerning myself with gossip years ago." Easy to say when you're a duke, when you have power and fortune and a title that ensures people will respect you whether they like you or not. Harder when you're a woman with nothing but dignity to your name. Is that what you think you have? Nothing? It's what I know I have, Your Grace. The world is quite clear on the subject. They turned again, moving through the other couples with a fluid grace that Clara wouldn't have thought possible 10 minutes ago. The Duke was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore," he said finally, "what would you do if you had everything? Power, fortune, freedom from judgment. What would you choose?" "That's a dangerous question." "Humor me." Clara considered. The honest answer sat on her tongue like a stone, heavy, undeniable, impossible to speak aloud. But something about the way he watched her, about the unexpected reality of his attention, made her reckless. "I would choose to be seen," she said quietly. "Not as a burden or a failure or a cautionary tale. Just seen, as I am, without apology." The Duke's hand tightened slightly at her back. When she looked up at him, his expression had shifted into something she couldn't read, something intense and almost angry, though not at her. "Then we have something in common," he said, "because I've spent my entire life being seen as nothing but my title. Everything I am reduced to a duchy and a fortune and a bloodline. No one has looked at me as simply Adrian Blackthorne in longer than I can remember." "Is that why you asked me to dance? Because I don't see the title?" "I asked you to dance because you're the only honest person in this room." The waltz was ending. Around them, couples were separating, bowing, preparing for the next set. The Duke stepped back, but he didn't release her hand immediately. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitmore," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, and then quieter, meant only for her. "I hope you'll save another for me before the evening ends." Before Clara could respond, before she could process what was happening, he was gone, moving through the crowd with the kind of purposeful stride that made people step aside without thinking. Clara stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, aware of the stares, the whispers, the speculation already building like storm clouds on the horizon. She should feel panicked, exposed, vulnerable in a way she'd spent years avoiding. Instead, she felt alive. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Whitmore felt alive. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of sideways glances and pointed whispers. Clara returned to her corner beneath the palm, but she was no longer invisible. Eyes tracked her movement. Conversation stopped when she passed. Lady Ashford, the hostess and Penelope's mother, materialized at her elbow with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Such an unexpected honor, the Duke asking you to dance. However did you manage it?" "I sat in a corner," Clara replied evenly. Apparently that was enough. "How economical of you." Lady Ashford's smile sharpened. "Though I do hope you're not getting any ideas. The Duke is known for his eccentricities. Dancing with you was likely nothing more than a momentary amusement. I'm quite aware of my place, Judith. You've been reminding me of it for 20 years. The use of her sister-in-law's Christian name was a calculated strike, familiar enough to be insulting, formal enough to maintain propriety. Lady Ashford's eyes narrowed. "Your place is here because of my husband's generosity," she said, her voice dropping to a hiss. "A fact you would do well to remember before you embarrass this family with delusions of grandeur." "I have no delusions," Clara said, "only observations. And I observe that my presence here is less about generosity and more about your unwillingness to chaperone your own daughters through another season." "How dare you, Aunt Clara!" Penelope descended on them with the force of a small hurricane, her face flushed with something between excitement and fury. Behind her, Marianne trailed like a reluctant shadow. "You must tell us everything," Penelope demanded. "What did the Duke say to you? Did he mention me? Did he ask about our family?" "He asked me to dance," Clara said. "That's all." "That's all?" "Aunt Clara, the Duke of Ravencourt doesn't just ask random women to dance. There must be more. Did you tell him about our bloodline? About Papa's connections?" "I told him nothing about you," Clara said, and watched Penelope's expression curdle. "We spoke of other things." "What things?" "Private things." Marianne's eyes widened. "Aunt Clara, you're not developing expectations, are you? Because Mama says the Duke would never seriously consider someone of your age and circumstances." "Marianne!" Lady Ashford's voice cracked like a whip. "That's quite enough." But the damage was done. The words hung in the air, brutal in their honesty. "Your age and circumstances." Translation: too old, too poor, too unmarriageable to merit real attention from a man like the Duke. Clara absorbed the blow with practiced grace. "You're quite right, Marianne. I have no expectations beyond getting through the remainder of this evening without being crushed by the flower arrangements." She turned to leave, but Penelope caught her arm, fingers digging in with enough pressure to bruise. "Don't embarrass us," Penelope hissed. "Whatever game you think you're playing, whatever desperate bid for attention this is, stop. The Duke was being charitable. Accept it for what it was and don't make yourself pathetic by imagining more." Clara looked down at her niece's hand, then up at her face. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine saying all the things she'd kept locked away for years. About Penelope's casual cruelty, about Lady Ashford's calculated neglect, about the way they'd turned her into a servant in all but name while maintaining the fiction of family charity. But she didn't, because causing a scene would only confirm everything they already believed about her, that she was bitter, desperate, unworthy of the scraps they threw her way. "I understand perfectly," Clara said quietly, and pulled her arm free. She made it back to her corner without incident, though her hands were shaking by the time she sat down. The palm fronds provided blessed cover, and Clara allowed herself a moment to simply breathe, to let the armor crack just enough to feel the hurt underneath. 20 years of this. 20 years of swallowing insults and accepting dismissal and being grateful for the bare minimum of consideration. And one dance, one single dance with a man she didn't know and would likely never speak to again, had reminded her just how much she'd given up to survive. "You look like you're contemplating murder." Clara's head snapped up. The Duke stood before her again, 2 glasses of champagne in hand, his expression unreadable. "I'm contemplating several murders," Clara said before she could stop herself. "I'm prioritizing based on who would be missed least." The Duke's lips quirked. "May I?" He gestured to the empty chair beside her. "It's your ballroom, Your Grace. Technically, you can do whatever you like." "It's Lady Ashford's ballroom," he corrected, settling into the chair with easy grace. "Which makes your permission more relevant than mine." He offered her one of the champagne glasses. "You look like you could use this." Clara accepted it, though she didn't drink. "Champagne won't solve my problems." "No, but it makes them more tolerable." Briefly, they sat in silence for a moment, watching the ballroom swirl with its careful choreography of ambition and alliance. The Duke, Clara noticed, had positioned himself so that his back was to the room, and his attention was fully on her, a statement that was either incredibly bold or incredibly foolish. "Your family is cruel to you," he said finally. "Their family. Cruelty is implied." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." Clara set the champagne glass down untouched. "Your Grace, I appreciate whatever this is, charity or curiosity or an elaborate joke I'm not privy to, but you should know that your continued attention is making my situation worse, not better." Explain. Every moment you spend speaking to me is a moment they'll punish me for later. Every kind word will be turned into evidence of my delusions. Every gesture will be used to remind me of my place. Clara met his eyes directly. You get to leave at the end of the evening and return to your life of power and consequence. I get to go back to theirs and live with the aftermath. The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something private and intense. What if you didn't have to go back? Clara laughed, a short, bitter sound. Where else would I go, Your Grace? I have no fortune, no property, no family willing to take me in. I'm entirely dependent on my brother-in-law's charity, such as it is. This is my reality. Reality can be changed. Not by women like me. Why not? Because, Clara stopped, frustrated. Because that's not how the world works. You know this. Women of my station, my age, my circumstances, we don't get to choose our own paths. We take what's offered, and we're grateful for it. And if what's offered is unacceptable, then we accept it anyway. The Duke studied her with that same intense focus that made Clara feel simultaneously exposed and seen. You're more intelligent than anyone in this room, he said finally, and you're wasting yourself in corners, being diminished by people who aren't fit to speak your name. Pretty words, Your Grace, but they don't change anything. Don't they? He stood abruptly, and for a moment Clara thought he was leaving, that she'd offended him somehow, pushed back too hard against his aristocratic conviction that reality could be bent to will, but instead he extended his hand again. One more dance, Miss Whitmore. Your Grace. One more dance, and then I'll show you exactly how much pretty words can change. Clara should refuse, should protect herself from whatever was about to happen, should remember that she was a practical woman who'd learned to survive by staying small, staying quiet, staying invisible. But the Duke's hand was steady, and his eyes held a challenge that sparked something long dormant in Clara's chest. For the second time that evening, she took his hand, and this time, when they stepped onto the dance floor, the entire ballroom fell silent. The second dance was different. The first had been a shock, a disruption in the careful order of things that left the ballroom buzzing with speculation. But this was a declaration. When the Duke of Ravencourt led Clara Whitmore onto the floor for a second time in one evening, he wasn't making a charitable gesture or indulging a momentary whim. He was making a statement. Clara felt it in the weight of every stare, in the sudden hush that fell over the crowd, in the way Lady Ashford's face went rigid with something that looked dangerously close to panic. The orchestra, which had paused between sets, launched into another waltz with almost aggressive enthusiasm, as if the musicians themselves understood they were playing for something historic. You're shaking, the Duke observed as he drew her into position. I'm terrified, Clara admitted, of what you're doing, of what it means. And yet you're still here. Because I'm also curious, and tired, and possibly losing my mind. His hand settled at her waist with proprietary certainty. Good. Sanity is overrated. They began to move, and this time Clara didn't stumble. The rhythm came easier now, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget, that she'd once loved dancing before it became another arena for humiliation. They're all watching, Clara said quietly. Let them. You don't understand what you're doing to my life. Don't I? The Duke's gray eyes fixed on hers with uncomfortable intensity. I understand perfectly. I'm disrupting your carefully maintained invisibility. I'm forcing you into a spotlight you've spent years avoiding. I'm making you visible, which is the most dangerous thing anyone can do to a woman who's survived by staying small. Clara's breath caught. Then why do it? Because invisibility isn't safety, Miss Whitmore. It's just a slower form of death. The words hit like a physical blow. Clara stumbled slightly, and the Duke's grip tightened, keeping her steady. I've offended you, he said. No, Clara's voice came out rough. You've seen me, actually seen me, and I don't know what to do with that. They turned through the crowd, and Clara caught glimpses of faces as they passed. Penelope, her expression twisted with jealous fury. Marianne, looking confused and vaguely hurt. Lady Ashford in heated conversation with another matron, both women staring at Clara with identical expressions of calculation. And then there were others, Young women whose names Clara didn't know, older women who'd spent their own seasons being overlooked, men who watched with varying degrees of interest or amusement, all of them witnessing this impossible thing, the Duke dancing with the spinster. Again. "Your Grace," Clara began, but he cut her off. "Adrian, when we're speaking privately, call me Adrian." "That's hardly appropriate. Neither is most of what I'm about to do. Might as well dispense with the formalities now." A warning bell went off in Clara's mind, loud and insistent. "What are you about to do?" "Something reckless, something that will change both our lives irrevocably, something I probably should have thought through more carefully but have already committed to in my mind." "That's not an answer?" "It's the only answer I can give you right now." His expression softened slightly. "But I need you to trust me. For the next few minutes, I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing, even if it seems insane." "I don't know you well enough to trust you." "Then trust yourself. Trust that you're stronger than you think, that you deserve better than corners and palm fronds and a family that treats you like an inconvenience." The music was building toward its crescendo. Around them, other couples began to slow, preparing for the end of the dance. But the Duke didn't release her. Instead, he pulled her slightly closer, not enough to be scandalous, but enough to make it clear this wasn't just about the steps. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying now, pitched to be heard by those nearest them. "Clara, I have a question to ask you." Time seemed to slow, Clara was aware of everything at once. The sudden attention of nearby dancers, the orchestra beginning to falter, the Duke's hand warm and solid at her back. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "perhaps this isn't the best." "I disagree. I think this is exactly the right time and place." He stepped back, still holding her hand, and in one fluid motion that sent shock rippling through the entire ballroom, the Duke of Ravencourt dropped to one knee. The orchestra stopped entirely. Every conversation ceased, every eye in the ballroom fixed on the impossible tableau before them. The most powerful man in England, kneeling before a woman everyone had dismissed as irrelevant. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare down at Adrian Blackthorne as he looked up at her with an expression that was equal parts determination and something else, something that looked almost like defiance. "Miss Clara Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying through the frozen silence, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The world tilted. Clara heard someone gasp, heard the shocked murmur that spread through the crowd like wildfire, heard Lady Ashford make a sound that might have been outrage or disbelief or both. But all she could focus on was the Duke, Adrian, kneeling before her, his hand still holding hers, waiting for an answer to a question that couldn't possibly be real. "You're mad," Clara whispered. "Quite possibly. Is that a yes?" "It's not. You can't just. We barely know each other." "We know enough." His grip tightened on her hand. "We know that you're brilliant and overlooked, that you've survived in a world designed to diminish you, that you deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be free of the people who've spent years making you feel like you're nothing." "And what do you know about yourself?" Clara demanded, her voice sharp with something between panic and anger. "What do I know about you beyond your title and your reputation? You know I'm bored with the game everyone else is playing. You know I see you as more than decoration or duty. You know that in the span of 2 dances you've been more honest with me than anyone has in years." He paused. "And you know that I'm offering you a way out of the cage you're in." Clara's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Dukes didn't propose to spinsters. Men of power and fortune didn't kneel in ballrooms before women with nothing to offer but sharp tongues and sharper minds. Unless, the thought crystallized with brutal clarity, unless there was something else at play. Unless this wasn't about her at all, but about something she didn't understand, some scheme or strategy or purpose that had nothing to do with actually wanting her. "Why?" Clara asked, and the word came out hard. "Tell me why you're really doing this." Something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Not guilt exactly, but acknowledgement, as if he'd been waiting for her to ask the real question. "Because I need a wife who won't try to change me," he said. "Who won't expect romance or devotion or the pretty lies everyone else deals in. I need someone intelligent enough to navigate society, but cynical enough not to be fooled by it. I need—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider. "I need a partner. Not a decorative accessory, not a broodmare for heirs, a partner. And you think I'm that person? Based on 2 dances and some conversation in a corner? I think you're the only person in this room who might be. The only one honest enough to say yes for the right reasons or no for the right reasons. Everyone else would calculate the advantages and accept regardless of reality. You'll actually consider whether this is a choice you can live with. He was right, and Clara hated that he was right. Every other woman here would have already said yes, would have thrown herself at the opportunity without thinking, without questioning, because that's what you did when a duke proposed. You didn't interrogate his motives or demand explanations. You accepted with gratitude and hoped for the best. But Clara had never been like every other woman. The right reasons, she repeated slowly. What would those be? Freedom, security, respect, power to shape your own life instead of being shaped by others. Adrian's voice dropped, became almost urgent. A chance to stop being invisible, to stop being dismissed and diminished and treated like a burden, to be a duchess instead of a dependent. It was tempting. It was so desperately, dangerously tempting that Clara felt it like a physical pull, the promise of escape, of transformation, of finally mattering in the eyes of a world that had spent decades telling her she didn't. And what do you get? Clara asked. Beyond a wife who won't try to change you? Adrian's expression shifted, something guarded sliding into place. That's a conversation for later, for after you've said yes. No. Clara pulled her hand free from his. That's a conversation for now. Because if I'm considering tying my entire life to yours, I deserve to know what I'm walking into. What game you're playing, what purpose I serve beyond being conveniently intelligent and cynical. The ballroom held its collective breath. Clara was aware that she was supposed to be overcome with joy, supposed to be tearfully accepting, supposed to be grateful for the miracle of a duke's proposal. Instead, she was negotiating, demanding answers, refusing to be swept along by the tide of expectation. Adrian rose to his feet in a single smooth motion. For a moment, Clara thought he would simply walk away, that she'd pushed too hard, demanded too much, revealed herself to be exactly as difficult as everyone had always claimed, but instead he smiled. Actually smiled, and it transformed his entire face from aristocratic stone to something almost human. 3 weeks, he said. Give me 3 weeks. Let me court you properly. Let me answer your questions. Let me prove that this is more than a convenient arrangement. And if at the end of that time you still think I'm playing some game you can't stomach, you can refuse me and I'll never speak of this again. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we let society think what it wants. We give your family something to rage about in private. We give the gossips their scandal. His eyes glinted. We make you visible. It was a challenge. Clara recognized it for what it was. A dare to step into the light, to risk everything on the chance that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than what her family had made her. The smart choice would be to refuse, to protect herself from the inevitable fallout, from the humiliation that would come when whatever this was fell apart. But Clara Whitmore had been making smart choices her entire life, and they'd led her to corners and palm fronds and being mocked by her own nieces. 3 weeks, she heard herself say, and you answer my questions honestly, all of them. Agreed. And if I decide this is a game I can't win, then you walk away with my respect and my silence. No consequences, no retaliation, no attempts to change your mind. Clara studied his face, looking for deception or calculation or the cruel amusement of a man playing with someone helpless. But all she saw was that same intense focus, that strange recognition, as if he saw in her something worth fighting for. It was probably a lie. It was almost certainly a trap. But it was also the first time in 20 years that anyone had offered Clara Whitmore a choice. Yes, she said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff. I'll give you 3 weeks. The ballroom exploded. The carriage ride back to the Hartley townhouse was conducted in suffocating silence. Lady Ashford sat across from Clara with her face carved from ice, her mouth pressed into a line so tight it had gone white at the edges. Penelope and Marianne flanked their mother like twin statues, both carefully avoiding looking at their aunt. Clara kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching London slide past in the darkness. Her hands were folded in her lap to hide their shaking. The enormity of what she'd done, what she'd agreed to, was beginning to settle over her like lead. The Duke had walked her back to her family after the proposal, had spoken briefly with Lord Hartley, who'd appeared from the card room looking confused and vaguely alarmed, had arranged to call tomorrow afternoon for a formal courtship visit. And through it all, Claire had felt the weight of the entire ballroom's attention, the speculation and shock and barely concealed judgment. She'd done this to herself. She'd said yes in front of everyone, made herself the center of a scandal that would be dissected in every drawing room in London by morning. The carriage stopped. They'd arrived home. Lady Ashford rose without a word and swept from the carriage, her daughters following. Clara moved to exit last, but Penelope blocked her path. "I hope you're pleased with yourself," Penelope hissed. "Whatever delusion you're indulging, whatever fantasy you've constructed, it won't last. The Duke will realize his mistake, and when he does, you'll be left with nothing but humiliation." "Perhaps," Clara said quietly, "but it will be my humiliation. Mine to own, mine to survive, not yours to orchestrate." She pushed past her niece and into the house. The next attack came faster than Clara had anticipated. She'd barely made it to her room, the small chamber at the back of the house, hardly bigger than a closet, when Lady Ashford appeared in the doorway. "We need to speak," her sister-in-law said. "Now." Clara set down her reticule with deliberate calm. "Then speak." Lady Ashford closed the door behind her, and the click of the latch felt ominous. "What game are you playing?" "I'm not playing anything." "Don't lie to me. The Duke of Ravencourt doesn't propose to women like you. He doesn't kneel in ballrooms before spinsters with no fortune, no connections, no prospects. So either you've done something to manipulate him, or this is some elaborate scheme you've concocted. Or," Clara interrupted, her voice sharp, "he sees something in me that you've spent 20 years refusing to acknowledge." Lady Ashford's laugh was cruel. "Such as?" "Intelligence, wit, the ability to hold a conversation beyond discussing the weather and last season's fashions. Those aren't qualities men value in wives. Men want beauty, breeding, dowries, things you don't have and never will." Clara felt the familiar sting of the words, but this time something was different. This time she had armor she'd never possessed before. The knowledge that someone, even if only for 3 weeks, had chosen her over all the beautiful, young, wealthy women in that ballroom. "The Duke seems to value different things," Clara said. "The Duke is using you." Lady Ashford stepped closer, her voice dropping to something almost sympathetic, which was somehow worse than outright cruelty. "I don't know why or what purpose you serve, but mark my words, this isn't about wanting you. Men like Ravencourt don't want women like you. They use them. And when he's done, when he's achieved whatever goal this proposal serves, he'll cast you aside. And where will you be then?" "I'll be wherever I choose to be, which is more freedom than I have now. You have security now. A home, food, clothing. My husband's charity keeps you from destitution." "Your husband's charity comes with a price," Clara shot back. "Being made to feel grateful for scraps. Being mocked by my own family. Being reminded daily that I'm a burden, an embarrassment, a cautionary tale. And you think marrying the Duke will change that? You think society will suddenly respect you because you wear a title?" Lady Ashford shook her head. "They'll despise you more than ever. They'll call you a schemer, a manipulator, a woman who trapped a duke through trickery. They'll make your life unbearable." "They already make my life unbearable. At least this way I'll have the resources to fight back." Lady Ashford's expression hardened. "If you go through with this, if you actually marry him, you'll be on your own. No help from this family. No support when it all falls apart. No place to return to when he realizes what a mistake he's made." "Good," Clara said, and meant it. "I've been on my own for 20 years while living under your roof. At least this way I'll stop pretending otherwise." Her sister-in-law stared at her for a long moment, and Clara saw the exact instant when calculation replaced anger. When Lady Ashford realized that threats wouldn't work, that Clara had already accepted the worst they could do to her. "Fine," Lady Ashford said coldly. "Destroy yourself. But don't expect any of us to mourn when you fall." She left, closing the door with exaggerated gentleness, the kind of controlled fury that was somehow more frightening than slamming. Clara sank onto her narrow bed and let herself shake. The Duke called the next afternoon at precisely 2 o'clock, as promised. Clara had spent the morning being alternately ignored and ambushed by various family members. Lord Hartley had cornered her at breakfast, demanding to know the Duke's intentions. Penelope had accidentally spilled tea on Clara's only decent morning dress. Marianne had cried and asked why Clara was ruining everything. By the time Adrian arrived, Clara was exhausted and her nerves were scraped raw. Lady Ashford received him in the formal drawing room, the one reserved for important guests, which Clara had rarely seen the inside of. The furniture was pristine, the curtains freshly cleaned, the whole room staged to impress. Lady Ashford herself had changed into her finest afternoon dress and arranged herself in a chair like a queen granting audience. Clara stood near the window in her second-best dress, the tea-stained one being unsalvageable, and tried not to look as rattled as she felt. "Your Grace," Lady Ashford simpered. "Such an honor to receive you. Please, sit. Clara, ring for tea." Adrian's eyes found Clara's across the room, and she saw the question there. "Are you all right?" She gave the smallest shake of her head. His expression hardened. "Thank you, Lady Ashford," he said, his tone perfectly polite and utterly dismissive. "But I was hoping to speak with Miss Whitmore, privately. Perhaps a walk in the garden?" Lady Ashford's smile went rigid. "I'm not certain that would be appropriate. With a chaperone, naturally." Adrian glanced at Penelope and Marianne, who'd materialized in the doorway like vultures. "Perhaps one of your daughters could accompany us. At a discreet distance, of course." It was masterfully done. Refusing would be admitting she didn't trust Clara with the Duke, which would insult both of them. Accepting meant allowing the very thing she wanted to prevent. "Penelope," Lady Ashford said through gritted teeth, "you'll chaperone." Penelope looked like she'd bitten into something sour, but she nodded. The garden behind the Hartley townhouse was small and practical. More herbs than flowers, more function than beauty. But it was private, and when Adrian offered Clara his arm, she took it gratefully. They walked in silence for a moment, Penelope trailing behind at the minimum acceptable distance. Clara could feel her niece's eyes boring into her back. "Your family is worse than you described," Adrian said quietly. "I didn't want to seem like I was complaining." "You should complain, loudly and often." He glanced down at her. "The tea stain on your dress wasn't an accident." "No. And I'm guessing you've been subjected to various forms of psychological warfare since last night?" "That's a dramatic way of putting it. Is it inaccurate?" Clara considered. "No." Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Behind them, Penelope made a small sound of protest, but he ignored her. "I need to ask you something honestly," he said. "And I need an honest answer. Are you afraid?" "Of what?" "Of me. Of this. Of what happens if you actually say yes at the end of 3 weeks?" Clara wanted to lie, wanted to be brave and confident and certain, but he'd asked for honesty, and he deserved it. "Terrified," she admitted. "I'm terrified that this is real and terrified that it's not. Terrified of what it means if you're sincere, and terrified of what it means if you're not. Terrified of leaving this life and terrified of staying in it. That's a lot of terror. I'm a very efficient worrier." His mouth quirked. Then, making sure Penelope could see, he lifted Clara's hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Clara's breath caught. It wasn't the gesture itself, formal, proper, perfectly acceptable in a courtship. It was the deliberateness of it, the way he held her gaze while doing it, the message being sent to the girl watching from 20 feet away. This woman is mine to court, mine to choose, mine to protect. "I'm going to tell you something," Adrian said, still holding her hand. "And you're going to think I'm lying, but I'm not. You are the bravest person I've met in years, not because you're unafraid. You're clearly terrified, but because you said yes anyway. Because you're willing to risk the only security you have on the chance that there might be something better. That's not cowardice. That's courage. Or stupidity. There's often very little difference." He released her hand but didn't step back. "I meant what I said last night, about answering your questions. Ask me anything." Clara glanced at Penelope, who was pretending not to listen while obviously straining to hear every word. "Not here," Clara said. "Not with an audience. Then come riding with me tomorrow, early, before your family wakes. We'll have privacy, and you can interrogate me to your heart's content." "I don't ride." "Can't or won't?" Clara smiled despite herself. "You asked me that about dancing." And you proved you could dance perfectly well, so I'm asking again, can't or won't? Haven't in years. I'm not sure I remember how. Then I'll teach you. Or reteach you. Consider it part of the courtship. His expression sobered. I want you to know who I am, Clara, the good and the bad. The parts I'm proud of and the parts I'm not. Because if we do this, if you actually agree to marry me, I need you to be choosing the reality, not some fantasy you've constructed. The same goes for you, Clara said. I'm not some noble victim waiting to be rescued. I'm difficult and sharp-tongued, and I've survived by being suspicious of everyone's motives. I'm not going to suddenly become sweet and biddable because you gave me a better option. Thank heavens for that. Sweet and biddable would bore me senseless within a week. They stood there in the garden, and Clara felt the strangest sensation, as if she were standing at a crossroads, able to see down both paths. One led back to her small room and her family's contempt and the slow suffocation of invisibility. The other led into unknown territory with a man she barely knew, toward a future that was either salvation or ruin. Tomorrow morning, she said. What time? 6 o'clock. I'll bring a gentle mare. We'll ride to Richmond Park. It's beautiful this time of year and private enough for honest conversation. 6 is early. You'll need to sneak out before your family wakes. Unless you'd prefer to ask permission. Clara's laugh was short and sharp. I haven't asked permission for anything in years. I've simply done or not done based on what I could get away with. Then get away with this. Adrian's voice dropped, became something almost conspiratorial. Meet me tomorrow, learn who I am, decide if I'm worth the risk. Penelope chose that moment to clear her throat pointedly. Aunt Clara, we should go inside. It's getting cold. It wasn't cold at all, but the message was clear. Enough privacy, enough conversation, enough of the Duke paying attention to the wrong woman. Adrian bowed to Clara with exaggerated formality. Until tomorrow, Miss Whitmore. Until tomorrow, Your Grace. She watched him walk away, watched him nod politely to Penelope, watched him leave the garden with that same purposeful stride that made people step aside. And she wondered, not for the first time, what exactly she'd agreed to. Sneaking out at 6 in the morning proved easier than Clara had anticipated. The household staff was minimal at that hour, just the scullery maid banking the kitchen fires and the boot boy hauling coal. Neither paid any attention to Clara slipping out the servants' entrance in her oldest riding habit, a dress so outdated it practically qualified as costume. Adrian waited on the street with 2 horses, a massive black stallion that looked barely controlled, and a smaller chestnut mare with kind eyes. You came, he said, and Clara heard the relief in his voice. I said I would. People say a lot of things they don't mean. Clara approached the mare carefully, letting the horse sniff her hand. The animal was beautiful, well-bred but calm, the kind of horse chosen for temperament over flash. When did you last ride? Adrian asked. 10 years ago, maybe more. My brother-in-law decided keeping a horse for my use was an unnecessary expense. Of course he did. Adrian's voice was flat with disgust. He moved beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool morning air. I'm going to help you mount. Are you comfortable with that? Clara nodded, and Adrian's hand settled at her waist, firm, sure, lifting her into the saddle as if she weighed nothing. For a moment, seated above him, Clara felt the rush of something she'd nearly forgotten, power, the ability to move, to escape, to go somewhere on her own terms. How does it feel? Adrian asked. Like freedom, Clara said honestly. They rode through London's waking streets in silence, letting the horses set an easy pace. Clara's muscles remembered what her mind had tried to forget, the rhythm of riding, the feel of the reins, the subtle communication between horse and rider. By the time they reached Richmond Park, she was almost comfortable. The park was nearly deserted at this hour. Morning mist hung over the grass, and deer grazed in the distance, their heads lifting to watch the riders pass. Adrian led them to a grove of oak trees overlooking a small pond. He dismounted first, then helped Clara down, his hands at her waist again, steadying her when her legs proved less reliable than she'd hoped. All right? He asked. Mostly. Clara held onto the saddle for a moment longer than necessary. Ask me again when I can feel my legs. They tethered the horses where they could graze, and Adrian produced a flask from his saddlebag. Tea, he said. Still hot, or relatively hot anyway. Clara accepted it gratefully, wrapping her hands around the metal warmth. They settled on a fallen log, close enough to talk quietly, but with enough space between them to be proper. "You promised to answer my questions," Clara said. "I did." "Then answer this one. Why me?" "Really? Not the pretty speech about intelligence and honesty. The real reason." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the pond. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, edged with something Clara hadn't heard before. "Because my father is dying." Clara's breath caught. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He's a bastard who's made my life miserable for 35 years. But he's dying, and before he does, he's determined to see me married to a woman of his choosing. Someone from a powerful family, someone who'll strengthen alliances, someone who'll be useful to the duchy in all the traditional ways. And you don't want that." I refuse to give him the satisfaction. Adrian's jaw tightened. "My entire life has been about living up to his expectations, following his rules, becoming the perfect heir to his perfect duchy. And I'm done. I'm done being what he wants me to be. So you're choosing me to spite him. I'm choosing you to free us both." Adrian turned to look at her directly. "You're right that this isn't a love match. It's not about romance or passion or any of the things poets write about. It's about two people who need something from each other. I need a wife my father will hate. Someone intelligent and strong and completely unsuitable by his standards. You need freedom from a family that treats you like garbage. We can give each other that." Clara absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. It was honest, at least. Brutally honest. "Your father is dying," she said slowly. "How long?" "Months, maybe. A year at most." "And after he's gone, what then?" "Then you're a duchess with full access to the duchy's resources. Then you have power, property, independence. Then you can do whatever you want for the rest of your life." "And you?" "I'll have fulfilled my duty, produced an heir eventually, if we're both willing, and proven that I'm not my father's puppet." It was a transaction, a bargain. Practical, logical, and utterly devoid of the sentiment society expected from marriage. Clara should have been horrified. Instead, she felt something close to relief. "I need to know something else," she said. "Is there someone else? Someone you actually want but can't have?" Adrian's expression shifted, something painful crossing his features. There was. Once, she married someone suitable, someone her family approved of. I learned early that want doesn't matter much in our world. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me that marriage based on feeling is a recipe for misery. Better to marry for practical reasons and maintain honest expectations. Clara handed back the flask. Her hands were steady now, her mind working through the implications. "If I agree to this," she said, "I want terms." "Such as?" "Independence. Not just financial, actual independence. My own household, my own schedule, my own choices. I won't trade being controlled by my family for being controlled by a husband." "Agreed." "And respect. I won't be paraded around like a trophy or hidden away like an embarrassment. We present a united front in public, but we're honest with each other in private." "Agreed." "And if either of us finds this arrangement unbearable, if we genuinely can't stand each other, we find a way to manage it civilly. No cruelty, no humiliation, no using power to hurt each other." "Agreed." Adrian studied her face. "Anything else?" "Honesty. You tell me when your father dies. You tell me if there are threats I need to know about. You tell me if I'm walking into something dangerous. No protecting me by keeping me ignorant. That's a harder promise to make. Then don't make it. But know that if you lie to me, if you hide things you think I can't handle, I'll consider our bargain void." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he extended his hand. "Honesty. Independence. Respect. Civility. You have my word." Clara took his hand. His grip was warm and solid and real. 3 weeks, she said. "Let's see if we can actually stand each other for 3 weeks. And then? And then we'll decide if freedom is worth the price." They sat there in the morning quiet, two people negotiating a marriage that would shock society and enrage their families, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not love. She wasn't naive enough to call it that. But possibility. The chance that maybe, just maybe, she could build something new from the wreckage of her old life. The ride back to London was companionable. They talked about inconsequential things, books they'd read, places they'd traveled, opinions on everything from politics to poetry. And Clara discovered that Adrian Blackthorne was genuinely intelligent, unexpectedly funny, and far more human than his reputation suggested. He left her at the servants' entrance with a promise to call again that afternoon. Clara slipped back into the house feeling lighter than she had in years. She made it halfway up the stairs before Lady Ashford's voice stopped her cold. "Where have you been?" Her sister-in-law stood in the hallway, still in her dressing gown, her expression glacial with fury. "Riding," Clara said simply. "With him." "Yes, unchaperoned. We were in a public park. At dawn, alone." Lady Ashford descended the stairs slowly, and Clara recognized the predatory quality to her movement. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The scandal this will cause when it gets out?" "And it will get out, Clara. Servants talk. Society learns everything." "Then society will learn I went riding with the man who's courting me. Hardly scandalous. It's improper. It's reckless. It's exactly the kind of behavior that proves you're unfit to be a duchess." Clara met her sister-in-law's eyes steadily. "Perhaps, but I'm going to be one anyway." She walked past Lady Ashford and up the stairs, leaving her sister-in-law sputtering in fury behind her. And for the first time in 20 years, Clara Whitmore went to her small room, closed the door, and smiled. The smile didn't last. By evening, the entire household knew about the dawn ride. By the next morning, half of London knew. And by the end of the week, Clara understood with brutal clarity what it meant to step from shadow into spotlight. The invitations arrived first. Thick cream envelopes with elegant script, all addressed to Miss Clara Whitmore. Not to Lady Ashford with Clara as an afterthought, but to Clara herself. Invitations to teas, to soirees, to garden parties and dinner engagements. Every hostess in London suddenly desperate to secure the presence of the woman who'd captured the Duke of Ravencourt's attention. Lady Ashford opened each one with increasingly rigid fury, reading the contents aloud in a voice that could have frozen water. "Lady Pemberton requests the pleasure of Miss Clara Whitmore's company for afternoon tea," she said, her knuckles white around the paper. "Not our family, not Penelope or Marianne. You." "I didn't ask for this," Clara said quietly. "Didn't you?" Lady Ashford's eyes were hard as flint. "Didn't you orchestrate this entire spectacle? Making yourself the center of attention, stealing opportunities that should belong to my daughters." "Mother," Marianne said softly from her seat by the window. "That's not fair." Silence. Lady Ashford didn't even look at her younger daughter. "You don't understand what's happening here, what she's done. Society is fickle, and right now they're fascinated by this novelty. But fascination fades. And when it does, we'll all suffer the consequences of Clara's ambition." Clara absorbed the accusation without flinching. She'd learned in the past week that her family's cruelty could evolve, could sharpen itself into new shapes designed to wound in ways simple mockery never could. "I should decline them," Clara said. "The invitations. If my acceptance causes this family harm, don't you dare!" The words came from Penelope, who stood in the doorway with an expression that mixed rage and something else, something that looked dangerously close to fear. "Don't you dare play the martyr now. You wanted this. You schemed for it, and now you'll live with every consequence." "I schemed for nothing," Clara said, her own temper beginning to fray. "The Duke approached me. He proposed to me. I didn't manufacture his interest or manipulate his intentions." "Then you're a fool as well as a schemer," Penelope shot back. "Because men like the Duke don't choose women like you unless there's something else at play, unless you're useful to them in ways you're too naive to understand." The words hit harder than they should have because they echoed Clara's own fears. The questions she asked herself in the dark hours of the night when Adrian's practical bargain felt less like freedom and more like a different kind of cage. "Enough." Lord Hartley's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway behind Penelope, and for once his usually mild expression was hard, with something that might have been disappointment. "Clara, I need to speak with you, alone." Clara followed her brother-in-law to his study, aware of 3 sets of eyes tracking her movement. The study was masculine and comfortable. Leather chairs, walls lined with books, the faint smell of pipe tobacco. Lord Hartley gestured for Clara to sit, then poured 2 glasses of brandy despite the early hour. "I'm not much for sentiment," he said, handing her a glass. "And I'll admit I haven't always been kind to you, but I'm a practical man, and I understand practical arrangements." "Is that what you think this is?" "I know it is." Lord Hartley settled into his own chair with a heavy sigh. "The Duke's father is dying. The old Duke wants his son married to someone suitable, probably that Thornbury girl, the one with the massive dowry and the connections to half the House of Lords. Adrian Blackthorne is choosing you to spite his father." Clara's hand tightened on the glass. "He told you this?" "He didn't have to. I've known the Blackthornes for 20 years. I know how they operate, how they think. Everything is strategy with that family. Everything serves a purpose." "Then what purpose do I serve?" "Rebellion." Lord Hartley took a drink, studying her over the rim of his glass. "You're everything his father would hate. No fortune, no connections, no youth or beauty to compensate. You're a middle finger to the old Duke's expectations. And when the old man dies, and he will soon, you'll be left as a duchess who earned her position through spite rather than merit." The words were harsh, but there was something almost gentle in Lord Hartley's delivery, as if he were trying to warn her rather than wound her. "You think I should refuse him?" Clara said. "I think you should understand what you're walking into. Society is entertained now, fascinated by the spectacle. But that will change. Once you're married, once the novelty wears off, they'll turn on you. They'll make your life unbearable in 1,000 small ways. And you'll have no family to fall back on. My wife has made that abundantly clear." "I've never had family to fall back on." "You've had a roof over your head and food on your plate. That's more than you'll have if this arrangement falls apart." Clara met her brother-in-law's eyes directly. "Then I'll find my own roof, my own food, my own life. Because anything is better than spending another 20 years being grateful for crumbs." Lord Hartley was quiet for a long moment. Then he raised his glass in a small salute. "You're braver than I gave you credit for, or more foolish. I genuinely can't tell which." "Neither can I," Clara admitted. She left the study with her hands still shaking and her resolve somehow firmer. Whatever happened with Adrian, whatever society did to her, whatever consequences came from this choice, at least she would have chosen it. At least she would have tried. The afternoon brought Adrian's promised call, and this time Lady Ashford insisted on remaining present for the entire visit. She positioned herself in the drawing room like a general preparing for battle, with Penelope and Marianne stationed on either side as reinforcements. Adrian arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably, his expression unreadable. He greeted Lady Ashford with perfect courtesy, nodded politely to the girls, and then turned his full attention to Clara. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you look tired." "Your Grace," Clara replied, "you look like you're bracing for combat." His mouth twitched. "Observant as always." "Tired as always," she countered. Lady Ashford cleared her throat with exaggerated delicacy. "Perhaps you'd both like to sit? I've arranged for tea." They sat. Tea was poured with aggressive politeness, and then Lady Ashford launched her attack. "Your Grace, I feel I must speak plainly. As Clara's family, we're concerned about the speed of this courtship. You've known each other barely a fortnight, and already there's talk of marriage." "There's more than talk," Adrian said mildly. "I proposed. She accepted. Conditionally, but still." "Exactly my point. Such haste seems unusual for a man of your position. Surely you'd want to consider your options more carefully. Take time to meet other suitable young ladies?" She gestured subtly toward Penelope, who sat up straighter and arranged her features into what was probably meant to be an inviting expression. Adrian's gaze didn't even flicker in Penelope's direction. "I have met other suitable young ladies, hundreds of them. I find them uniformly boring." The room went very still. "Boring," Lady Ashford repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Tedious. Predictable. More interested in my title than my person. Your niece is none of those things." "My niece is nearly 40 years old with no fortune, no connections, and no prospects. These are facts, Your Grace, not criticisms. I'm simply trying to understand what could possibly attract a man of your stature to such an unconventional choice." "Judith," Clara's voice was soft but sharp enough to cut, "that's enough. I'm only trying to protect you. By reminding everyone in the room that I'm worthless, By highlighting every reason the Duke should reconsider? That's an interesting form of protection. Adrian set down his teacup with deliberate precision. Lady Ashford, I appreciate your concern for your niece, but I assure you, I'm quite capable of making my own decisions about whom I choose to court. And I choose Clara, not despite her age or circumstances, but because of who she is. If that's difficult for you to understand, perhaps that says more about your judgment than mine. Lady Ashford's face went white, then red. How dare you? I dare quite easily. I'm a duke. I can dare almost anything. Adrian stood, and the movement had enough force behind it that everyone else in the room instinctively rose as well. Miss Whitmore, would you care to take a turn in the garden? I find this room rather stifling. Clara stood on shaking legs. I'd like that very much. They left the drawing room in heavy silence. Clara could feel her family's shock radiating behind them like heat from a fire. No one spoke to Lady Ashford that way. No one defended Clara that way. No one chose her over the path of least resistance. In the garden, Adrian let out a long breath. I'm sorry, he said. That was more confrontational than I intended. Don't apologize. It was magnificent. Your family will make you pay for it. They were already making me pay. At least now I have the satisfaction of watching you demolish their assumptions. Adrian's expression softened slightly. How bad has it been? This past week? Manageable, Clara lied. Try again. Horrible. They're watching everything I do, criticizing every choice, finding fault with every breath. Lady Ashford has decided I'm a schemer. Penelope thinks I'm delusional. Marianne just looks sad, which is somehow worse than the anger. And your brother-in-law? Surprisingly pragmatic. He thinks I'm making a terrible mistake, but he respects my right to make it. They walked in silence for a moment. The garden looked different in afternoon light, the herbs more vivid, the shadows sharper. Clara wondered if everything looked different now, or if she was simply seeing clearly for the first time. I have news, Adrian said quietly. My father wants to meet you. Clara's stomach dropped. When? Tomorrow. He's summoned us both to Blackthorn Manor. Summoned. That's the word he used, as if we're courtiers rather than his son and future daughter-in-law. Can we refuse? We could, but it would make things more difficult. He's dying, Clara. If we deny him this meeting, he'll find other ways to make his displeasure known, ways that could impact our future. Clara's mind raced. Meeting the dying Duke felt like walking into a trap, like being examined and judged and found wanting by a man who already despised what she represented. What should I expect? Cruelty disguised as concern, tests designed to make you fail, questions meant to humiliate. Adrian's jaw tightened. He'll try to break you, to prove that you're unsuitable, that I'm making a mistake, that he was right all along. And if I actually am unsuitable? You're not. You don't know that. You barely know me. Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her fully. I know you've survived 20 years in a family that treated you like garbage. I know you said yes to a proposal that terrified you because the alternative was worse. I know you're intelligent enough to see through my father's games and strong enough to play them anyway. That's all I need to know. What if I embarrass you? Impossible. What if I prove him right? Clara. Adrian's voice was firm. You could walk into that meeting and dump soup on his head, and you still wouldn't prove him right, because his objections aren't about you. They're about control, about forcing me to comply with his vision for my life. You're just convenient ammunition. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she could face the old Duke without crumbling. But fear was a living thing in her chest, clawing at her resolve. I'm not brave enough for this, she whispered. Yes, you are. You've been brave your entire life. You just didn't have anyone telling you so. The next morning arrived too quickly. Adrian sent a carriage for her. Not a subtle hired vehicle, but the Blackthorn ducal carriage, black lacquered with a crest emblazoned on the door. A statement of ownership that made Clara's skin prickle. Lady Ashford watched from the drawing room window as Clara departed, her expression unreadable. Penelope and Marianne stood behind her like attendants at an execution. The ride to Blackthorn Manor took 2 hours. Clara spent them trying to calm her racing heart and failing spectacularly. The countryside rolled past in shades of green and gold, beautiful and utterly irrelevant. All Clara could think about was the meeting ahead. The old Duke's cruelty, the very real possibility that she would fail some test she didn't even know she was taking. Blackthorn Manor appeared like something from a nightmare, all gray stone and Gothic towers perched on a hill like a predator watching its territory. The carriage swept up a drive lined with ancient oaks, and Clara felt her breath coming shorter with each passing moment. Adrian waited at the entrance, dressed in formal black that made him look every inch the Duke he would soon become. He handed her down from the carriage with steady hands. "Breathe," he said quietly. "I'm breathing." "You're hyperventilating. There's a difference." Clara forced herself to slow her breathing, to gather the armor of dignity she'd worn for so many years. "How do I look?" "Terrified." "That's honest." "You asked for honesty." Adrian's expression softened. "But you also look strong. Remember that. Whatever he says, whatever he does, you're stronger than he knows." The entrance hall was cavernous and cold, all marble and dark wood, and portraits of Blackthorn's past glaring down from the walls. A servant led them through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, each one more oppressive than the last. And then they arrived at a set of heavy oak doors. The servant knocked once, then opened the doors without waiting for a response. The room beyond was a study, but calling it that was like calling a cathedral a church. It was massive, dominated by a desk the size of a small carriage and walls lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. And behind the desk, in a chair that resembled a throne, sat the Duke of Ravencourt, or what was left of him. The old Duke was dying. That much was immediately clear. His skin had a gray pallor, his once powerful frame reduced to something skeletal. But his eyes were sharp and cruel, and they fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her want to step backward. "So," he said, his voice like gravel scraping stone, "this is the creature you've chosen to humiliate me with." Adrian's hand found Clara's elbow, steadying. "Father, this is Miss Clara Whitmore. Clara, my father, the Duke of Ravencourt." Clara executed a perfect curtsy, muscle memory from her one failed season, still intact after all these years. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving me." "Don't thank me. This wasn't kindness. This was necessity." The old Duke gestured with one trembling hand. "Come closer. Let me look at what my son considers suitable." Clara forced herself to walk forward, to stand before the desk like a prisoner before a judge. The old Duke's eyes raked over her with clinical assessment. "Nearly 40, he said. "Plain features, outdated dress. No fortune, no family of consequence, no youth to recommend you." He looked past her to Adrian. "Is this revenge? Is this your way of punishing me for trying to secure your future?" "This is me choosing my own future," Adrian replied evenly. "By selecting the least appropriate woman in England? By selecting a woman I actually respect, a concept I realize is foreign to you." The old Duke's laugh was bitter and wet. "Respect. You think respect matters in marriage? In alliances? Marriages are about power, about strategy, about strengthening bloodlines and securing influence. This," he gestured dismissively at Clara, "this accomplishes nothing." "It accomplishes my freedom," Adrian said. "Your freedom?" The old Duke's voice rose, then broke into coughing. When he recovered, there was blood on his handkerchief. "You're the heir to a duchy. You don't get freedom. You get responsibility. I get to choose whom I marry." "And you choose this? This spinster with nothing to offer?" Clara felt each word like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd endured worse from her own family. She could endure this. But then the old Duke turned his attention back to her, and his expression shifted into something more calculating. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore," he said, "what do you imagine life will be like as a duchess? Do you think you'll suddenly be accepted, respected? Do you think society will forget that you're a charity case who trapped a duke?" "I don't imagine anything, Your Grace," Clara said quietly. "I'm well aware of what I am and what society thinks of me." "Then why agree to this farce?" "Because the farce I'm currently living is worse." Something flickered in the old Duke's eyes. Not approval, but acknowledgement, as if she'd surprised him. "At least you're honest about your motivations," he said, "unlike my son, who pretends this is about anything other than defying me." "My motivations are my own," Adrian said coldly. "Your motivations are transparent. You want to wound me before I die. You want to prove you're not my puppet. You want to punish me for every perceived slight, every moment of discipline, every instance where I pushed you to be worthy of your position. You didn't push me to be worthy. You tried to break me into the shape you wanted. And I failed. The old Duke's smile was terrible. You're weak, Adrian, sentimental, more interested in feelings than power. This marriage proves it. You're choosing personal satisfaction over strategic advantage. When I'm gone, you'll regret this. When you're gone, Adrian said quietly, I'll finally be free to build the life I want instead of the life you demanded. The old Duke turned back to Clara. Do you understand what you're marrying into? The expectations, the scrutiny, the enemies you'll make simply by existing in a position you haven't earned? I understand that nothing I do will ever be enough for people like you, Clara said. That no matter how hard I work or how well I perform, there will always be someone ready to remind me I don't belong. I've lived with that my entire life. Becoming a duchess won't change it, but at least I'll have the resources to fight back. Silence filled the room. The old Duke stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh, painful sound that dissolved into more coughing. She has spine, he said to Adrian. I'll give you that. More spine than the simpering girls you could have chosen. But spine won't protect her from what's coming. What's coming? Clara asked. The old Duke's smile was cruel. War. Because I've ensured it. Do you think I would simply let my son marry against my wishes without consequence? I've spent the last week making certain that every influential family in England knows you're unsuitable. I've spread rumors, planted doubt, ensured that society will turn on you the moment you wear the Blackthorn name. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. You've what? Adrian's voice was dangerous. I've protected the duchy's reputation. When I'm gone, you'll inherit my title, my fortune, my position. But you'll also inherit the consequences of your choices, and she, the old Duke pointed at Clara, she'll discover that being a duchess without society's approval is worse than being a spinster in a corner. You're lying, Adrian said. You don't have the strength. I have lawyers, allies, friends who owe me favors. I've spent 30 years building influence, and I'm using every bit of it to ensure your marriage is a disaster. The old Duke leaned forward, his eyes burning with fever and malice. I can't stop you from marrying her, but I can make certain you both regret it for the rest of your lives. Clara couldn't breathe. The room was closing in, the weight of what the old Duke had done pressing down on her like a physical thing. Why? She heard herself ask. Why go to such lengths? Because my son needs to learn that defiance has consequences. Because you need to understand that you're a pawn in a game you don't even comprehend. And because, the old Duke smiled, because I can. Adrian moved toward the desk, his expression murderous. You're a dying old man clinging to power you no longer have. I have enough power for this. The old Duke's voice was smug despite his weakness. Enough to destroy her reputation. Enough to ensure that when she becomes duchess, she'll be isolated, ridiculed, and utterly miserable. You wanted to hurt me? Congratulations. You've ensured she'll pay the price. Clara's legs felt weak. This was worse than she'd imagined. Worse than simple family disapproval or social awkwardness. The old Duke had weaponized his entire network against her, had turned her future into a battlefield she hadn't even known she was entering. We're leaving, Adrian said, his hand finding Clara's arm. Now. Run if you like. It won't change anything. The old Duke's voice followed them. She's doomed, Adrian, and you did it to her. Remember that when she's crying in corners at society events, being cut by women who once might have accepted her. Remember that you're the one who painted a target on her back. They left the study at something close to a run. Adrian pulled Clara through corridors and downstairs, out into the gray afternoon where the carriage still waited. He handed her in without ceremony, then climbed in after her and pounded on the ceiling to signal the driver. The carriage lurched forward, and Clara finally let herself shake. He's bluffing, Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. He doesn't have the strength to orchestrate something that elaborate. He does. Clara's voice was hollow. You said it yourself. Everything is strategy with your family. He's had weeks to plan this, weeks to turn me into something toxic. Then we fight back. How? Clara turned to face him, and she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. How do we fight against whisper campaigns and social exclusion, against rumors spread by people with more power and influence than we'll ever have? Your father is dying, but his allies aren't. They'll continue what he started, if only to honor his memory. Adrian was silent, because he knew she was right. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I brought you into this. I made you visible, and my father turned that visibility into a weapon. This is my fault." "No." Claire's voice was steadier now, hardening into something sharp. "This is his fault. His cruelty, his need for control, his determination to punish you even from the grave. Don't take responsibility for his monstrousness. But what do we do?" Clara looked out the carriage window at the countryside rolling past, at the world that had always been hostile to her in small ways and was now preparing to be hostile in larger ones. And she made a decision. "We call it off," she said. Adrian's head snapped toward her. "What?" "The engagement, the courtship, all of it." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "You were right. I'm a target now. Being associated with me will damage you, will damage the duchy, will give your father exactly what he wants even after he's dead." "I don't care what my father wants, but I do." Clara's voice was firm. "Because I'm not going to be the reason you lose everything. I'm not going to be the weapon he uses to destroy you from beyond the grave." "Clara, no." "Yes." She reached out and took his hand, the first time she'd touched him voluntarily, and possibly the last. "You gave me 3 weeks to decide. I'm deciding. This isn't worth the cost. Not to you, not to me, not to anyone." "You're letting him win." "I'm refusing to play a game I can't win. There's a difference." The carriage was approaching London now. Clara could see the city in the distance, gray and sprawling and utterly indifferent to her existence. "What will you do?" Adrian asked quietly. "What I've always done. Survive. Find a way forward that doesn't involve destroying you in the process." "And if I don't agree? If I refuse to call it off?" Clara smiled, and it was the saddest expression she'd ever worn. "Then I'll refuse you publicly. I'll tell everyone you made a generous offer and I realized I couldn't accept. I'll take the blame, spare you the scandal, and disappear back into my corner." "That's not what I want." "I know, but it's what has to happen." They rode the rest of the way in silence. When the carriage stopped outside the Hartley townhouse, Adrian didn't try to stop Clara from leaving. He just sat there, looking broken in a way that made Clara's heart ache. "I'm sorry," she said again. "For everything." She stepped down from the carriage and walked toward the house that had never been a home. Behind her, she heard Adrian call her name. She didn't turn around. Inside, Lady Ashford was waiting in the entrance hall, her expression triumphant in a way that made Clara's stomach turn. "Well?" her sister-in-law demanded. "How did it go with the old Duke?" Clara looked at her, at this woman who'd made her life miserable for 20 years, who'd taken pleasure in every small cruelty, who was now practically vibrating with hope that Clara had been humiliated, and something inside Clara snapped. "Perfectly," she heard herself say. "He gave us his blessing. The wedding is in 3 weeks." Lady Ashford's face went white. "You're lying." "Am I?" Clara smiled, and it felt like warfare. "Congratulations, Judith. You're about to be related to a duchess. I'm sure that will be quite the adjustment for you." She walked past her sister-in-law and up the stairs, leaving chaos in her wake. And only when she reached her small room and locked the door behind her did Clara let herself collapse against the wall and sob, because she'd just lied to her family. She'd just committed to a marriage she'd decided to refuse. She'd just trapped herself in a corner far worse than any palm frond had ever provided. And she had absolutely no idea what to do next. Clara spent the night staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift across the plaster as her mind raced through the catastrophe she'd created. She'd lied. To her family, to herself, possibly to Adrian. She'd committed to a marriage she'd decided to refuse, then announced that marriage as inevitable. And now she was trapped between 2 impossible choices. Go through with a wedding that would destroy her, or back out and prove every cruel thing anyone had ever said about her. By dawn, Clara had made a decision. If she was going to be destroyed either way, she might as well be destroyed on her own terms. She dressed carefully in her second-best morning dress. The tea-stained one had been beyond saving, and made her way downstairs before the rest of the household stirred. The kitchen was warm from the banked fires, and the scullery maid looked startled to see her. "Miss Whitmore," You're up early. I need to send a message, Clara said, urgently, to the Duke of Ravencourt. The girl's eyes widened, but she nodded and scurried off to wake the boot boy who could run messages. Clara wrote quickly, her handwriting steady despite her shaking hands. Meet me at Richmond Park, same place as before. Dawn tomorrow. Come alone. See. She sealed it, handed it to the boot boy with strict instructions for delivery, and then returned to her room to wait. The household woke around her in stages. She heard Lady Ashford's sharp voice directing servants, heard Penelope and Marianne arguing over something trivial, heard Lord Hartley's heavy footsteps in the hall. But no one came to Clara's door. No one demanded explanations for her announcement the previous evening. They were afraid, Clara realized, afraid that she actually had the old Duke's blessing, that this impossible marriage was real, that their hold over her was finally broken. Let them be afraid. The reply from Adrian came at noon, delivered by a footman in Blackthorn livery, who handed the sealed letter directly to Clara, while Lady Ashford watched from across the drawing room with barely concealed fury. Clara broke the seal with trembling fingers. I'll be there. But Clara, please don't do anything rash. We can fix this. She burned the letter in her fireplace and spent the rest of the day preparing. The next morning, Clara slipped out of the house at first light, using the same servant's entrance she'd used before. The streets were quiet, the city still half asleep, and Clara felt like a ghost moving through a world that didn't quite believe she existed. Adrian waited by the pond, his horse already tethered. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, his hair disheveled, his usual controlled demeanor cracked around the edges. You came, Clara said. You asked me to. I'm starting to think I'd do just about anything you asked. He studied her face. What happened after you left yesterday? Your message sounded urgent. I told my family we're getting married in 3 weeks, that your father gave us his blessing. Adrian went very still. Why would you do that? Because I was angry. Because Lady Ashford was so smugly certain I'd been humiliated. Because I wanted to see her face when I told her she'd be related to a duchess. Clara laughed, and it sounded slightly unhinged even to her own ears. And because I'm apparently very good at making terrible decisions when I'm emotional. Clara, I know it was stupid and reckless, and now I've backed us both into a corner. But I've been thinking about it all night, and I have a plan. Tell me it doesn't involve actually getting married in 3 weeks. Clara took a deep breath. It involves calling your father's bluff. Adrian frowned. Explain. He said he spent weeks poisoning society against me, spreading rumors, planting doubt, ensuring I'll be isolated and miserable as a duchess. But what if he's exaggerating? What if his influence isn't as absolute as he thinks? It's not exaggeration. My father doesn't bluff about things like this. Maybe not, but even if he's telling the truth, he's made one critical mistake. Clara met Adrian's eyes directly. He's assuming I care about being accepted by society, that I need their approval to survive. Don't you? I've spent 40 years being rejected by society, by my own family, by everyone who decided I wasn't worth their time or attention, and I'm still here, still standing, still fighting. Clara's voice grew stronger. Your father weaponized visibility against me. He made me a target. But visibility works both ways. If I'm going to be visible anyway, I might as well use it. Adrian was watching her with something that looked like cautious hope. How? By refusing to play the game the way he expects. By not hiding or shrinking or apologizing for existing. By being exactly what I am, intelligent, sharp-tongued, unconventional, and daring society to reject the future Duchess of Ravencourt. Clara paused. Your father wants me to be humiliated? I'll give him something better. I'll give him irrelevance. That's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. At least this way, I'm choosing how to fight. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, and Clara could see him working through the implications. Then he smiled, actually smiled, bright and genuine and transformative. You're magnificent, he said. Absolutely magnificent. My father tried to destroy you, and you're turning it into strategy. I'm turning it into survival. There's a difference. Not much of one. Adrian moved closer, his expression intense. But you can't do this alone. If we're going to make this work, If we're actually going to go through with the marriage and fight back against whatever my father set in motion, we need to be united, completely. No half measures, no doubts, no escape routes. Are you asking me to actually marry you? Not as a conditional arrangement, but as a real commitment? I'm asking if you're willing to gamble everything on the chance that we might win, that we might build something real from this mess, that we might prove everyone wrong, my father, your family, all of London, by simply refusing to fail. Clara's heart was pounding. This was the cliff edge, the point of no return. If she said yes, there would be no backing out, no safe retreat to her corner and her palm fronds. I'm willing, she heard herself say, but I have conditions. Of course you do. We tell the truth. To each other, always. No more secrets about your father's machinations or society's schemes. We face everything together. Agreed. And we support each other publicly. Whatever attacks come, and they will come, we present a united front. No letting me take the blame alone, no protecting your reputation at my expense. Agreed. And Clara hesitated, then forced herself to continue. And you stop apologizing for choosing me. Stop acting like I'm a burden you're carrying. If we're doing this, we're doing it as equals who chose each other, not as a duke taking pity on a spinster. Adrian's expression softened. I've never pitied you, not once. I've admired you, been frustrated by you, wanted to protect you, but never pitied you. Then prove it. Marry me like you mean it, not as rebellion against your father, not as a practical arrangement, but as a genuine choice. Can you do the same? Marry me like you mean it, even knowing what we're walking into? Clara thought about everything that had led her to this moment. 20 years of invisibility. A family that treated her like garbage. A society that had dismissed her as irrelevant. And one man who'd looked at her in a corner and seen something worth fighting for. Yes, she said, I can do that. Adrian extended his hand. Clara took it, and standing by the pond in the gray morning light, they made a pact that felt more binding than any formal ceremony. 3 weeks, Adrian said. Can you be ready in 3 weeks? I've been ready for 20 years, I just didn't know it. They rode back toward London as the sun began to rise, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite hope. That was too fragile, too easily destroyed. But determination. The certainty that whatever came next, she would face it with her eyes open and her armor in place. When they reached the city, Adrian didn't take her directly home. Instead, he guided them to a street Clara didn't recognize, stopping before an elegant townhouse with a blue door. Where are we? Clara asked. Your new home, temporarily. Adrian dismounted and helped her down. I own this property. It's been sitting empty for years. I thought, if you're willing, you might stay here for the next 3 weeks. Away from your family, away from their influence and their cruelty. Clara stared at the townhouse. It was beautiful, far nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived. I can't accept this. Why not? Because it's too much. Because people will talk. Because you're not used to being given things without strings attached. Adrian's voice was gentle. There are no strings, Clara. Just a house you can use. A place where you can breathe without someone criticizing every breath. Consider it a wedding gift. We're not married yet. Then consider it an engagement gift, or a please don't change your mind gift. I'm not particular about the terminology. Clara looked at the blue door, then back at Adrian. What about my things? My clothes, my books? I'll send servants to collect them. Your family won't dare refuse a duke's direct request. It was tempting. So desperately tempting that Clara felt it like a physical ache. To leave the Hartley household, to step away from the constant judgment and casual cruelty, to have space that was hers alone. All right, she said, but only if you promise me this isn't about hiding me away. I won't be tucked out of sight like an embarrassment. Never. You're about to be the most visible woman in London. This is just giving you a base of operations that doesn't undermine you at every turn. The house was furnished but sparse, waiting for someone to make it into a home. Adrian showed Clara through the rooms, a drawing room with large windows, a dining room that could seat 12, a library with empty shelves begging to be filled, and upstairs, bedrooms with pristine linens and furniture covered in dust cloths. It's too much, Clara said again, but her voice lacked conviction. It's exactly enough, and it's yours for as long as you want it. Adrian paused at the landing. I'll send staff over today. A housekeeper, a cook, a lady's maid, if you'll accept one. People who answer to you, not to your family. I don't know how to manage a household. Then you'll learn. You're intelligent enough to master anything you set your mind to. Clara walked through the bedroom that would be hers, running her fingers over furniture that was finer than anything she'd ever owned. The window looked out over a small garden, private, peaceful, hers. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. We still have 3 weeks of warfare ahead of us. Then we'd better start preparing. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of calculated strategy and deliberate visibility. Clara moved into the townhouse despite Lady Ashford's outraged protests. Adrian sent an announcement to the London papers declaring their engagement officially. And together, they began the campaign to reshape Clara's narrative before the old Duke's poison could fully take effect. The first test came at Lady Pemberton's garden party, one of the season's most anticipated events. Clara arrived on Adrian's arm, dressed in a new gown he'd insisted on commissioning. It was deep emerald silk, modern without being scandalous, and it fit her perfectly. Every head turned when they entered. Clara felt the weight of the stairs, heard the sudden hush in conversation. Lady Pemberton herself approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Miss Whitmore, and your Grace. How lovely to see you both." "Lady Pemberton," Clara said smoothly, "thank you for the invitation. Your gardens are spectacular." They exchanged pleasantries that felt like fencing matches, each word chosen carefully, each smile calculated. Clara was aware of other guests watching, cataloging every gesture and expression to dissect later in their drawing rooms. Then Lady Thornbury arrived, the woman whose daughter was supposedly the old Duke's choice for Adrian. She was elegant and sharp-eyed, and she made a point of approaching them immediately. "Your Grace," she said to Adrian, "and this must be your unconventional choice." The insult was wrapped in courtesy, but it was still an insult. Clara felt Adrian tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. "Lady Thornbury, how kind of you to acknowledge me. I understand your daughter is quite accomplished. It must be difficult watching her be passed over for someone so unconventional." The older woman's smile froze. Around them, Clara heard a few shocked intakes of breath. "You didn't acknowledge the competition directly. You certainly didn't twist the knife while doing it." "My daughter," Lady Thornbury said icily, "is content with the match her father has arranged. Unlike some, she understands the importance of appropriate alliances." "How fortunate for her. I'm afraid I could never settle for content when extraordinary was available." Clara smiled sweetly. "But then, we all have different standards." Lady Thornbury's face went rigid. She inclined her head stiffly and walked away, and Clara felt a small thrill of victory. "That was dangerous," Adrian murmured. "That was necessary. Your father's allies expected me to be cowed, to apologize for existing. I'm done apologizing." "I noticed." They moved through the party, and Clara noticed something shifting. Yes, there were still cold stares and whispered comments. Yes, Lady Thornbury was clearly poisoning every conversation she joined. But there were others, women who approached with genuine curiosity, men who engaged Clara in actual conversation, even a few who seemed almost impressed. "You're not what we expected," one elderly countess said bluntly. "The rumors suggested you were some desperate fortune hunter, but you seem to have your wits about you." "Thank you," Clara said. "I think?" "It's a compliment. Rare thing these days, a woman with actual intelligence. Most of these girls are decorative idiots." The Countess studied Clara with shrewd eyes. "You'll need that intelligence. The Duke's father has made quite the campaign against you." "I'm aware." "Are you prepared for it?" Clara met the older woman's gaze directly. "I've survived worse with less. I think I can manage high society's disapproval." The Countess smiled, genuinely this time. "I believe you might. Good. This circle could use some fresh blood. We've been suffocating in propriety for too long." It wasn't universal acceptance, but it was something, a crack in the wall of opposition, a hint that maybe, just maybe, Clara could win a few allies. By the end of the party, Clara was exhausted but exhilarated. They'd survived. More than survived. They'd made a statement. In the carriage ride back, Adrian was quiet. Clara waited, giving him space to process. "My father sent a message today," he said finally. "Through his lawyers. He's demanding I call off the engagement, threatening to disinherit me if I don't. Clara's stomach dropped. Can he do that? Not easily. The duchy is entailed. It passes to me regardless. But he controls significant assets that aren't part of the entail. Money, properties, investments. He could leave me with the title and very little else. That's not a threat. That's blackmail. It's how he operates. Adrian's jaw tightened. He's betting I'll value my inheritance more than my freedom. And will you? No. The word was flat, final. Let him disinherit me. Let him give everything to distant cousins or charity or burn it all in a bonfire. I'm done letting him control my life. Clara reached across the carriage and took his hand. That's a brave choice. It's the only choice. I won't give him the satisfaction of breaking me. Then we're matched, two stubborn people refusing to break. Adrian's grip tightened on her hand. Thank you. For what? For being exactly as difficult as you promised. For refusing to make this easy. For fighting when everyone expected you to run. Clara smiled. You're welcome. Though I should warn you, I'm only going to get more difficult from here. I'm counting on it. The second major test came days later, at a formal dinner hosted by Lord and Lady Ashford themselves, an event Clara learned about through a coldly formal invitation delivered to her new townhouse. You don't have to go, Adrian said when she showed him the invitation. This is clearly a trap. Of course it's a trap, but I can't avoid my own family forever. And if I don't show up, they'll say I'm ashamed, that I'm hiding. You could be, after how they've treated you. I could be, but I'm not. Clara set the invitation aside. I'll go. We'll go. And we'll show them exactly what they lost when they decided I was worthless. The evening of the dinner, Clara dressed with particular care. Another new gown. This one, midnight blue with silver embroidery, elegant without being ostentatious. Her hair was styled by the lady's maid Adrian had sent, a competent woman named Mary, who seemed genuinely pleased to have Clara as an employer. You look like a duchess already, miss, Mary said. I feel like I'm going into battle. Same thing, isn't it? For ladies like you. Adrian collected her at 7, and they arrived at the Hartley townhouse precisely on time. A butler Clara had never seen before, Lady Ashford must have hired someone impressive for the occasion, showed them into the drawing room. The gathering was small and carefully curated. Lord and Lady Ashford, Penelope and Mary Ann, and a handful of other families, all chosen, Clara realized immediately, for their connection to the old Duke's network. Lady Ashford greeted them with a smile that was pure poison wrapped in silk. Clara, dear, and your Grace, how kind of you to join us. We were just discussing your upcoming nuptials. How thoughtful, Clara said smoothly. I do hope the discussion was favorable. We have concerns, Lord Hartley said, his expression grave. About the haste of the marriage. About whether you've fully considered the implications. I've considered everything, Clara replied, and I'm proceeding anyway. But are you prepared? This from Lady Thornbury, who was apparently a guest. Of course she was. Prepared for the scrutiny, the expectations, the judgment that comes with such a position? I've been judged my entire life, Clara said. By my family, by society, by strangers who decided my worth based on my lack of fortune. Being judged as a duchess can't possibly be worse than being judged as a spinster. Can't it? Lady Thornbury leaned forward. At least as a spinster you were invisible, insignificant. Now you'll be visible, and every flaw will be magnified. Every mistake will be scrutinized. Every inadequacy will be public knowledge. Then I'll try not to have too many inadequacies. Clara's voice was pleasant, but her eyes were hard. Though I suppose that depends on who's keeping score. Dinner was announced, and they moved to the dining room. Clara found herself seated between two of Lady Ashford's allies, women who spent the first course asking pointed questions about her background, her education, her qualifications for becoming a duchess. Clara answered each question with the same calm directness that had served her all evening. Yes, she was nearly 40. No, she had no fortune. Yes, she understood she was unconventional. No, she wasn't intimidated by that fact. By the third course, the questions had shifted from interrogation to something almost like curiosity. You're not what we expected, one of the women admitted. The Duke's father suggested you were a schemer, someone who'd trapped his son through manipulation. The Duke's father, Clara said carefully, is dying and angry about it. I'm a convenient target for that anger. But I didn't trap anyone. I simply said yes when asked. And you're not afraid of the position, the responsibility? I'm terrified, but fear has never been a reason not to try. After dinner, the women withdrew to the drawing room while the men remained for port and cigars. Lady Ashford immediately cornered Clara. I don't know what game you're playing, her sister-in-law hissed, but it won't work. Society sees through you. They know you're unsuitable. Some do, Clara agreed. Others are willing to reserve judgment. And a few, she glanced at the women who'd questioned her at dinner, now watching with interest rather than hostility, are starting to wonder if maybe the old Duke was wrong. He's not wrong. You'll destroy the Blackthorn reputation. The Blackthorn reputation will be fine. What's really bothering you, Judith, is that I'm leaving, that you're losing your convenient target for every petty cruelty, that you'll have to find someone else to make yourself feel superior to. Lady Ashford's face went white with rage. How dare you? I dare because I have nothing left to lose. You can't threaten me with poverty. I've lived in it under your roof. You can't threaten me with social isolation. I've experienced that my entire life. You can't even threaten me with your disapproval because I stopped valuing your opinion years ago. Clara stepped closer, her voice dropping. I'm marrying Adrian Blackthorn in 10 days. I'm becoming a duchess whether you approve or not. And there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop me. She walked away, leaving her sister-in-law speechless behind her. Penelope intercepted her near the doorway. You think you've won, her niece said. But this isn't over. The Duke's father has allies everywhere. They'll make your life miserable. Then I'll be miserable with resources instead of miserable with nothing. I'll take that trade. You're going to fail. You're going to embarrass yourself and him. And when it all falls apart, I'll still have tried. I'll still have fought. I'll still have refused to accept that invisible was my only option. Clara met Penelope's eyes. What will you have? Another season of being paraded around like livestock? Another year of pretending you don't see the calculation in every man's eyes when they evaluate your dowry against your personality? Penelope flinched as if struck. I'm not your enemy, Clara said more gently. I never was. But I'm not your victim anymore either. Remember that. The men rejoined them, and Clara found Adrian immediately. He took one look at her face and steered her toward the exit. Time to leave? He asked. Past time. In the carriage, Clara finally let herself shake. Adrian wrapped his coat around her shoulders without comment, and they rode in silence for several minutes. You were brilliant tonight, he said finally. I was vicious. Same thing sometimes. He paused. My father's allies were expecting someone they could intimidate, someone who would crumble under pressure. Instead, they got you. And what did they get exactly? A woman who fights back, who refuses to apologize for existing, who's smart enough to turn their weapons against them. Adrian smiled. They got someone formidable, and I think some of them are starting to realize it. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that her performance tonight had actually changed minds, rather than just delayed the inevitable. But whether it had or hadn't, one thing was clear. She was committed now. In 10 days, she would marry Adrian Blackthorn. In 10 days, she would become the Duchess of Ravencourt. And whatever came after that, she would face it with her eyes open and her armor intact. The woman everyone overlooked was about to become impossible to ignore. The impossible was about to become real. 3 days before the wedding, Clara stood in the drawing room of her townhouse, surrounded by fabric samples, invitation proofs, and lists written in Mary's careful handwriting. The wedding was small by aristocratic standards. Adrian had insisted on that, wanting to avoid the spectacle his father would have demanded. But small still meant 200 guests, a ceremony at St. George's, and enough logistics to make Clara's head spin. The flowers arrived this morning, Mary said, consulting her list. White roses and ivy, just as you requested, and the modiste sent word that your dress is ready for final fitting. Clara nodded absently, staring at the guest list. Half the names were strangers. Adrian's connections, political necessities, people who had to be invited regardless of whether they'd actually attend. The other half were a minefield of social calculation. Lady Thornbury's name was there, crossed out and reinstated twice. The Hartleys were invited, though Clara doubted they'd come. Miss Whitmore? Mary's voice pulled her back. Are you all right? Just thinking about everything that could go wrong. or everything that could go right. Clara smiled despite herself. Mary had become an unexpected ally, efficient, unflappable, and possessed of a dry wit that had kept Clara sane through the chaos of wedding preparation. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mary went to answer it, returning moments later with an envelope sealed in black wax. Clara's hands went cold. Black wax meant mourning. And there was only one person whose mourning would be announced this way. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. The message was brief, written in Adrian's hand. He's gone. Come to Blackthorn Manor when you're able. We need to talk. The old Duke was dead. Clara sank into the nearest chair, the letter falling from her fingers. She should feel relief. The man who'd sworn to destroy her was gone. His threats ended. His campaign against her cut short. But all she felt was a strange numbness, and underneath it, a creeping dread. Because dying didn't mean he'd stopped fighting. It just meant he'd played his final move. Mary, Clara said quietly, have the carriage prepared. I'm going to Blackthorn Manor. Should I pack a bag, miss, in case you need to stay? No, I won't be staying there. Not yet. The ride to Blackthorn Manor felt longer than before. Every mile weighted with significance. The estate looked different in afternoon light, less Gothic nightmare, more simply imposing. The servants who greeted Clara wore black armbands, their expressions appropriately solemn. Adrian met her in the entrance hall. He looked exhausted, his face drawn with grief and something else, something that looked like fury barely held in check. Thank you for coming, he said, and his voice was rougher than usual. Of course I came. I'm sorry for your loss. Are you? The question wasn't accusatory, just curious. He tried to destroy you. I wouldn't blame you for feeling relief. I feel complicated things, but sorry is among them. He was still your father. Adrian's expression softened slightly. He was, and he left me one final gift. He gestured toward the study. His lawyers are waiting. Apparently there's a codicil to his will that concerns you directly. Clara's stomach tightened. That can't be good. No, it really can't. The study looked different with the old Duke gone, emptier somehow, despite all the furniture remaining exactly where it had been. 3 men in severe black suits sat at the massive desk, papers spread before them. They rose when Clara and Adrian entered. Your Grace, the eldest lawyer said, bowing to Adrian, and Miss Whitmore. Thank you for coming so promptly. There are matters we must discuss before the funeral. Get on with it, Adrian said, his voice tight. The lawyer cleared his throat and lifted a document. The late Duke of Ravencourt amended his will 1 week ago. The changes are significant. To your inheritance specifically, Your Grace, and to your upcoming marriage. What did he do? Clara asked, though she already knew it would be terrible. He placed conditions on the inheritance, specifically the non-entailed assets, approximately 2/3 of the total estate value, are to be held in trust and released to Your Grace only if certain criteria are met. Adrian's hands clenched into fists. What criteria? That the marriage to Miss Whitmore be annulled within 1 year, that Your Grace marry a woman from an approved list of families, and that any future children be raised according to principles outlined in a supplemental document. The lawyer paused. If these conditions are not met, the assets transfer to a trust benefiting several charitable organizations and distant relatives. Your Grace would retain the duchy and entailed properties, but lose control of the majority of the family wealth. The room went very quiet. Clara did the calculations quickly. 2/3 of the estate meant Adrian would still have his title, still have lands and the duchy itself, but he'd lose the fortune that made the duchy powerful, lose the influence that came from wealth, lose everything except the name. He's asking me to choose, Adrian said slowly, between you and my inheritance, between my freedom and my fortune. He's asking you to prove he was right, Clara corrected, that you'd sacrifice everything for spite, that your rebellion matters more than your duty. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting the conversation to be quite so direct. There are legal options, the eldest lawyer offered. We could contest the codicil, argue that it was written under duress or without proper capacity, but that would take years, and success is far from certain. Don't contest it, Adrian said flatly. Your Grace, I said don't contest it. My father made his final play. Let it stand. Clara's breath caught. Adrian, you can't just... Can't what? Refuse to let him win? Refuse to prove that I'm exactly the mercenary he thought I was? Adrian turned to the lawyers. I'm marrying Clara Whitmore in 3 days. The conditions will not be met. Distribute the assets according to my father's wishes. Your Grace, please reconsider. This is a substantial fortune. I don't care. Release the funds. Make the transfers. Do whatever the will requires. Adrian's voice was hard as iron. My father spent his entire life trying to control me. I won't give him the satisfaction of succeeding from beyond the grave. The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly debating whether to push further. The eldest finally nodded. Very well, Your Grace. We'll begin the process. Though I must ask, Miss Whitmore, are you aware of what this means for your future? The reduction in circumstances, the loss of income, the impact on your position as Duchess? I'm aware, Clara said, though her mind was still reeling. Thank you for your concern. After the lawyers left, Clara and Adrian stood alone in the study that had been his father's domain. Clara could see the weight settling onto Adrian's shoulders. Not just grief, but the full burden of what he'd chosen. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, I did. You could have married one of the approved women, secured your inheritance, found me a settlement that would have given me independence without costing you everything. Clara, Adrian turned to face her fully. Stop. Just stop. I know what I've done. I know what I'm giving up. And I'm doing it anyway. Why? Your father's dead. You've already won. You don't need to prove anything anymore. This isn't about proving anything to him. It's about proving something to myself, that I'm capable of choosing based on what's right instead of what's profitable, that I can build something real instead of something calculated. But the cost will be substantial. I know. We'll have the duchy, the title, the estates, but we'll be what my father would have called shabby genteel, aristocratic in name, but without the fortune to support the position properly. We'll have to be careful with money, strategic about expenditures. We won't be able to maintain multiple estates or fund the kind of social presence that usually comes with the duchy. Clara's mind raced through implications. A duchess without funds was still powerful, but diminished. Unable to patronize the arts, unable to make the charitable donations that bought social influence, unable to maintain the appearance expected of the position. You're asking me to marry you knowing that I'll be blamed for this, she said. Society will say I cost you your fortune, that you gave up everything for a woman who wasn't worth it. Let them say it. We'll prove them wrong. How? Adrian moved closer, his expression intense. By being so good at what we do that they can't ignore us. By using the power we have, the title, the influence, the duchy itself, to reshape what it means to be aristocracy. My father's generation built empires on wealth and tradition. We'll build ours on something different. On what? On actually doing something useful. On reform instead of status quo. On proving that power doesn't require money, it requires vision. He paused. I know it sounds naive, I know it's idealistic, but I'd rather try and fail at building something meaningful than succeed at being just another wealthy duke playing the same tired games. Clara stared at him, this man who'd started as a stranger in a ballroom and become someone she was beginning to understand. Someone who'd just thrown away a fortune because he refused to be controlled, someone very much like her. All right, she said. Then we do it together. We build something new, and we face whatever comes. You're sure? Because once we marry, there's no going back. You'll be tied to my reduced circumstances, my damaged reputation, my father's final spite. I've been tied to worse for 20 years. At least this time I chose it. Adrian smiled, genuinely smiled, the kind that transformed his entire face. Then we'd better get married before you come to your senses. The wedding took place 3 days later under gray skies that threatened rain but held. Clara stood in the vestry of St. George's wearing a gown of ivory silk that Mary had helped her into with trembling hands. It was simpler than most wedding gowns. No elaborate train, no excessive ornamentation, just clean lines and excellent tailoring. Clara had chosen it specifically to avoid looking like she was trying too hard, like she was playing dress-up in a role she hadn't earned. You look beautiful, miss, Mary said, adjusting the small coronet of white roses in Clara's hair. Like a proper duchess. I don't feel like a proper duchess. I feel like I'm about to walk into a firing squad. Same thing, isn't it? For ladies like you, Clara laughed despite her nerves, You sound like you're speaking from experience. My mother was a lady's maid to a countess. I grew up watching women navigate society like it was a battlefield. You're doing better than most, if you don't mind me saying. A knock at the door made them both jump. Lord Hartley stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in formal dress. "They're ready," he said. "If you still want to go through with this." Clara had debated who should walk her down the aisle. She had no father, no close male relative who actually cared about her welfare. In the end, she'd asked Lord Hartley, not because he deserved the honor, but because refusing to include her only family would have given society exactly the ammunition they wanted. "I'm ready," Clara said. Lord Hartley offered his arm. As they walked toward the sanctuary, he spoke quietly. "You know what they're saying about the inheritance?" "I can imagine. They're saying you cost him everything, that the Duke gave up his fortune for you and will regret it within a year." "Probably. They're also saying, some of them, that maybe you're worth it, that any woman who can inspire that kind of sacrifice must have something remarkable about her." Lord Hartley paused. "I never saw it. That's my failure, not yours. But I see it now. Whatever happens after today, know that you earned this. Not through manipulation or scheming, but through sheer refusal to accept that invisible was your only option." Clara's throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I didn't make you strong. You did that yourself." The organ music swelled, the doors opened, and Clara stepped into the sanctuary. 200 faces turned toward her. She saw the Hartley women in the third pew, Lady Ashford's expression rigid with fury, Penelope looking like she'd bitten into something sour, Marianne with tears on her cheeks that might have been genuine. She saw Lady Thornbury and her allies positioned strategically, their expressions calculating as they assessed Clara's dress, her bearing, her worthiness. She saw the empty front pews on what should have been the groom's family side, stark evidence of the old Duke's absence, of the fortune Adrian had sacrificed, of everything this marriage represented. And she saw Adrian waiting at the altar, looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. Not love. They weren't there yet, might never get there in the traditional sense. But partnership, respect, recognition of exactly who she was and what she brought to this impossible arrangement. Clara walked down the aisle with her head high and her hand steady on Lord Hartley's arm. With each step, she felt the weight of expectation, judgment, and speculation pressing down on her. And with each step, she refused to bend under it. The ceremony was brief, traditional vows spoken without embellishment, rings exchanged, simple gold bands that Adrian had chosen himself. The vicar pronounced them husband and wife with the solemnity befitting a ducal wedding. And then Adrian kissed her. It was their first kiss. They'd avoided that intimacy during the courtship, maintaining propriety even as they broke every other rule. It was chaste and brief and entirely appropriate for a church wedding. But it was also a promise, a seal on the bargain they'd made, the partnership they'd chosen, the war they'd declared against everyone who'd said they couldn't succeed. When they turned to face the congregation as the Duke and Duchess of Ravencourt, Clara saw the shock on some faces, the calculation on others, the barely concealed hostility on those who'd already decided she was unworthy. Let them think what they wanted. She was a duchess now, and she had work to do. The wedding breakfast was held at Blackthorn House, the London residence rather than the manor, which was still in mourning. It was smaller than the wedding Adrian's father would have demanded, less ostentatious than what society expected from a ducal celebration. But it was theirs. Clara moved through the reception with Adrian at her side, accepting congratulations from guests whose sincerity varied wildly. Some were genuinely pleased. The elderly countess who'd spoken to Clara at Lady Pemberton's garden party cornered her with a fierce hug and whispered, "You've given the old biddies something to gossip about for years. Well done." Others were coolly polite, offering congratulations that felt like veiled insults. Lady Thornbury approached with her daughter in tow. "Your Grace," she said to Clara, using the title for the first time. "Congratulations on your marriage. I do hope you're prepared for the responsibilities that come with your new position." "I'm a quick learner," Clara replied, "and I've survived harsher teachers than society." "Indeed, though I wonder if surviving and thriving are quite the same thing. I suppose we'll find out." Lady Thornbury's daughter, a pretty vapid girl who'd barely looked at Clara during the ceremony, spoke up with surprising directness. "Mama says you trapped the Duke with clever words and manipulation, but I don't think that's true." I think he chose you because you're not like us, because you're interesting. Her mother's face went white. Amelia! It's all right, Clara said, genuinely amused. I appreciate your honesty, Miss Thornberry. I wish I could be like you, the girl continued, apparently emboldened by Clara's response. Not caring what everyone thinks, choosing your own path instead of the one you're given. Amelia, that's quite enough. Actually, Clara interrupted, that's exactly enough. Thank you, Miss Thornberry. Your honesty is refreshing in a room full of calculated courtesy. The girl beamed. Lady Thornberry looked like she might have an apoplexy. Clara moved on before the situation could deteriorate further. Penelope and Marianne approached together, and Clara braced herself for whatever attack her nieces had prepared. But Marianne spoke first, her voice soft. Congratulations, Aunt Clara. You look beautiful. Thank you. Penelope's expression was harder to read, anger mixed with something that might have been grudging respect. You actually did it. You married him despite everything. Despite everything, Clara agreed. Was it worth it? Knowing what you gave up? What he gave up? Clara considered the question seriously. Ask me in a year. Right now I'm still too close to it to know. Honest answer. Penelope's mouth quirked slightly. I suppose I can respect that, even if I still think you're insane. The feeling is mutual. After the nieces left, Adrian materialized at Clara's elbow with champagne. Surviving? He asked. Barely. Your turn. How are the political allies handling the news of your reduced fortune? With the expected calculation. Several have already suggested business arrangements that would benefit us both. Translation. They're circling like sharks, testing whether we're vulnerable enough to manipulate. Are we? We're vulnerable, but not weak. There's a difference. Adrian's expression was thoughtful. I've been thinking about what we discussed, about building something new. I have some ideas. Tell me. Later, when we're alone and can actually plan without an audience. Clara glanced around the room at the 200 guests watching their every move, cataloging every gesture, already forming the narratives they'd spread through their social circles. The spinster who trapped a duke. The duke who threw away his fortune. The marriage that couldn't possibly last. I'm ready for later, Clara said. I'm very ready for later. Later came after midnight, when the last guests had finally departed and Clara and Adrian found themselves alone in the drawing room of Blackthorn House. Clara had changed out of her wedding gown into a simple dress, and Adrian had shed his formal jacket. They looked less like the Duke and Duchess of Ravencourt and more like two exhausted people who'd just survived an ordeal. Well, Adrian said, pouring them both brandy, we're married. Legally bound in the eyes of society and the law. Having second thoughts? Constantly. You? Every other minute. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping brandy and letting the weight of the day settle. You mentioned ideas, Clara said finally. About what we could build. Adrian set down his glass and leaned forward. The duchy has resources beyond money. We have land, tenant farmers, political connections, historical influence. My father used all of that to consolidate power and maintain status quo. What if we used it differently? How? Reform. Real reform. We push for changes in tenant farming practices, fair wages, better housing, education for workers' children. We use our political connections to support legislation that actually helps people instead of just preserving aristocratic privilege. We turn the duchy into a model for what responsible aristocracy could look like. Clara's mind caught fire with the possibilities. That would make enemies. Absolutely. Every landowner who profits from keeping their workers desperate and uneducated. Every politician who benefits from maintaining the system as is. Every aristocrat who thinks noblesse oblige means throwing charity at problems while doing nothing to actually solve them. But it would also make allies, progressive reformers, workers who see tangible benefit, maybe even some of society, if we frame it correctly. Exactly. Adrian's eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. My father's generation built empires on exploitation disguised as tradition. We could build something different, something that actually means something beyond accumulating wealth. Clara thought about it, really thought about it, testing the idea for weaknesses. It was risky. It would make them controversial. It would give ammunition to everyone who already thought they were unsuitable, but it was also purposeful, meaningful, a way to use the power they had to actually accomplish something beyond social climbing. "I'm in," she said, "but I have conditions." "Of course you do. We include women, not just as charity cases or objects of reform, but as active participants. We fund education for girls, create opportunities for women to own property, support legislation that gives women more legal rights." Adrian's smile was slow and genuine. "You want to use a duchy to advance women's rights?" "I want to use a duchy to prove that women with resources and power can reshape society. That visibility doesn't have to mean vulnerability. That—" Clara paused, feeling the truth of it. "That the invisible women, the overlooked ones, the spinsters in corners, they matter. They have value. And given the chance, they can change the world. That's revolutionary. That's necessary. If we're going to fight, let's fight for something that actually needs changing." Adrian stood and extended his hand. Clara took it, letting him pull her to her feet. "Then we have a plan," he said. "Build a different kind of duchy, fight for meaningful reform, make enemies of everyone who profits from the status quo and allies of everyone who's been overlooked by it. And probably fail spectacularly," Clara added. "Probably. But we'll fail trying to do something worthwhile. That's better than succeeding at something meaningless." They stood there in the quiet drawing room, two people who'd found each other through calculation and necessity, now bound by something that felt almost like genuine partnership. "Adrian," Clara said quietly, "thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For refusing to accept that invisible was my only option. For—" her voice caught. "For making me believe I was worth fighting for." "Clara," Adrian's expression was serious, "you were always worth fighting for. You just needed someone to prove it to you, and now—" He smiled. "Now you get to prove it to everyone else." The months that followed were brutal and exhilarating in equal measure. Adrian pushed forward with duchy reforms, increasing tenant wages, funding schools on duchy lands, using his seat in the House of Lords to support progressive legislation. Clara established foundations for women's education, hosted salons that brought together reformers and intellectuals, and used her position to elevate voices that had previously been ignored. Society was scandalized, then intrigued, then grudgingly impressed. Not everyone, of course. Lady Thornbury and her allies waged a steady campaign of social exclusion, ensuring that certain doors remained closed to the new Duchess of Ravencourt. But other doors opened. Reformers, intellectuals, progressive aristocrats who'd been waiting for someone with resources and courage to push for real change. 6 months after the wedding, Clara hosted a charity auction to fund a school for working-class girls. She'd expected modest attendance, maybe 50 guests, mostly reformers and outsiders. 300 people came. Clara stood at the entrance of Blackthorn House, watching carriages arrive in an endless stream, and felt something she'd never experienced before: validation. Not from being chosen by a duke, but from choosing to do something meaningful with the position she'd earned. The auction raised enough money for 3 schools. And the next morning, every newspaper in London ran stories about the Duchess of Ravencourt's radical approach to philanthropy. A year after the wedding, the elderly countess who'd befriended Clara at the garden party summoned her for tea. "You've done it," the countess said without preamble. "You've made yourself indispensable. Society can't ignore you anymore because you've made yourselves too useful to dismiss." "That was the plan," Clara admitted. "And the Duke? How is married life treating you?" Clara smiled. "We're partners, true partners. We argue about strategy and policy. We support each other's projects. We've built something that actually matters instead of just existing to maintain status." "Are you happy?" Clara considered the question. Happiness felt too simple for what she'd found. It was more complex than that: satisfaction mixed with purpose, partnership mixed with genuine respect, and underneath it all, a sense of having earned her place instead of simply being granted it. "I'm fulfilled," she said finally. "I'm visible. I'm valued for who I actually am instead of who people think I should be. Happy doesn't quite cover it." The Countess raised her teacup in salute. "To fulfillment, then, and to the woman who refused to stay in her corner." 2 years after the wedding, Clara received an unexpected visitor. Mary Ann appeared at Blackthorn House looking nervous and determined. Clara received her in the drawing room that had become her favorite, the one with large windows overlooking the garden. Aunt Clara, Marianne began, then stopped. I suppose I should call you Your Grace now. Clara is fine. We're family, however complicated that relationship is. Marianne twisted her hands together. I need advice, or help, or just someone who understands. Tell me. The story came out in a rush. Marianne had fallen in love with a man her parents disapproved of, a second son with modest prospects and no fortune. Lady Ashford was pushing for a different match, one that would benefit the family financially. Marianne was being pressured to choose duty over feeling, security over love. I don't know what to do, Marianne said, tears streaming down her face. Mother says I'm being foolish, that love fades but financial security lasts, that I should accept the practical match and be grateful. Clara felt the echo of her own past in Marianne's words. The pressure to be practical, the insistence that feelings didn't matter compared to security. What do you want? Clara asked. I want to choose for myself. I want what you have, a partnership built on respect instead of calculation. I want to matter to someone instead of just being useful. Clara took her niece's hands. Then choose that. Choose yourself. It won't be easy. Your mother will fight you. Society will judge you. People will say you're making a mistake. Like they said about you. Exactly like they said about me. And I'm not going to lie. Some days are hard. Some days I wonder if the easy path would have been better. But then I remember what the easy path actually was. Corners and palm fronds and being invisible. And I know I made the right choice. But what if I fail? What if it doesn't work out? Then you'll fail having tried, having chosen, having mattered to yourself even if no one else saw your worth. Clara squeezed Marianne's hands. I can't promise you success, but I can promise you this. If you choose him, if you choose yourself, you'll have an ally. Resources if you need them, a place to go if your family turns on you. You won't be alone. Marianne sobbed openly now. I thought you'd hate us, after everything we did to you. I did hate you, for a while, but hate takes energy I'd rather spend on building something better. Clara smiled. Besides, proving you all wrong by succeeding is much more satisfying than holding grudges. Can I ask you something, honestly? Always. Do you love him? The Duke? Clara considered the question carefully. Love felt like the wrong word for what she and Adrian had built. It was deeper than romance, more complex than affection. It was partnership forged in battle, respect earned through struggle, trust built through keeping promises when it would have been easier to break them. I love what we've built together, Clara said finally. I love the life we've created, the purpose we've found, the way we've proven everyone wrong while doing something meaningful. Is that the same as loving him? I don't know, but it's enough. It's more than enough. Marianne left looking stronger, more certain, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a letting go of the anger that had sustained her through so many difficult years. She didn't need to hate her family anymore. She'd won by building something better. 5 years after the wedding, Clara stood in the garden of Blackthorn House watching Adrian play with their daughter. Elizabeth was 3 years old, dark-haired and sharp-eyed like her father, with her mother's stubborn determination already evident in the set of her jaw. Adrian was teaching her to identify birds, pointing out species with the same intensity he brought to duchy reform and parliamentary debates. That's a robin, Elizabeth announced proudly. Excellent. And that one? A sparrow? Close, that's a finch. See the difference in the beak? Clara watched them together and felt a contentment she'd never expected to find. They'd built this, a family, a purpose, a life that mattered. Not through conforming to expectations or accepting what they were told they deserved, but through sheer refusal to accept that their limitations were permanent. The duchy was thriving under their management. Tenant reforms had increased productivity while improving workers' lives. The schools they'd funded were producing educated young people who were starting to change their communities. The political alliances they'd built were slowly shifting policy toward actual reform instead of empty rhetoric. And Clara herself had become something she'd never imagined, a voice that mattered. When she spoke at charity functions or wrote letters to newspapers advocating for women's rights, people listened. Not because she was a duchess, though that helped, but because she'd proven herself worth listening to. Mama! Elizabeth ran over, clutching a feather. Look what I found! It's beautiful, darling. What kind of bird did it come from? A robin. I know because Papa showed me. Clara knelt down to examine the feather with appropriate seriousness. You're absolutely right. Well done. Adrian joined them, and the three of them sat in the garden together. A duke who'd chosen purpose over fortune, a duchess who'd chosen visibility over safety, and a child who would grow up knowing she could choose anything. Do you ever regret it? Adrian asked quietly, while Elizabeth chased butterflies across the lawn. Giving up the easier path? The invisible corner where no one could hurt you? Clara thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, sitting beneath palm fronds at a ball, accepting cruelty as inevitable, believing that survival meant staying small. She thought about everything that had happened since, the proposal that changed everything, the old duke's final spite, the wedding that society said would fail, the years of building something meaningful from the wreckage of expectations. Never, she said. Not once. Not even when Lady Thornberry still refuses to acknowledge you at social events? Especially not then. Her refusal to see my worth says everything about her limitations, and nothing about my value. Adrian smiled and took her hand. You know what you've done, don't you? You've changed the game. There are women now, young women, overlooked women, women who thought they had no options, who look at you and see possibility, who refuse to accept that invisible is their only choice because you proved there's another way. That was always the point, wasn't it? Not just surviving, but showing others how to fight. And you've done it magnificently. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter explore the garden with fearless curiosity, and Clara felt the full weight of what they'd accomplished. She'd started as the woman everyone overlooked, the spinster in the corner, the family embarrassment, the cautionary tale. She'd become the woman who refused to disappear. And in refusing, in fighting, in choosing visibility even when it was dangerous, she'd rewritten the rules for what was possible, not just for herself, for every woman who'd ever been told she didn't matter, for every overlooked soul who'd been dismissed as irrelevant, for everyone who'd survived by staying small and was finally ready to be seen. That evening, Clara stood at the window of her study, the room she'd claimed in Blackthorn House for her work on women's education initiatives. Papers covered her desk, correspondence from reformers across England requesting her support or advice. A half-finished speech for Parliament sat waiting for her attention. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about corners and palm fronds and 2 dances with a stranger, about proposals and threats and the old duke's final spite, about choosing the dangerous path and walking it anyway. And she smiled, because in the harshest worlds, survival wasn't about being chosen. It was about having the courage to choose your own worth. Clara Whitmore had chosen, and she'd won, not through becoming someone else, not through conforming to what society demanded, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to accept that invisible was her only option. She'd fought her way from shadow to spotlight, and she'd used that spotlight to illuminate the path for everyone who came after. The woman everyone overlooked had become impossible to ignore. And she was just getting started.